of students in a hall reminds me that it's a Friday. Is it the case that there's only a few of us? So good morning to everyone. But it's actually a good news that it's a Friday, because only in 10 hours is going to be a Friday evening or Friday night. It's the most precious time of the week. And the first lecture today is going to be presented by Risto Solunchev. You have already heard his first part of the presentation. And today we are going to continue the same topic. So it's a second part of the presentation. And we are going to, let's say, prepare ourselves for the Friday evening mood, because we are going to start a hero music. So thank you very much, Risto, for your coming. Just for your information, I need to prepare some other stuff outside, so I'll be out for half an hour, but in the middle of the lecture, I'll be back, and I'm really looking forward to hear at least part of your music. So thank you very much for your coming, and the floor is yours.
Okay. Because Kada? Dojdi vam. Ovdje? Ova? To je to? Dobro, bete. Ide li vatica? Okay. Okay. We stopped with the song of Depeche Mode and the question, where is the revolution? So let's see. If we want to answer that question, we must first see the idea of Europe as a result of historicity, and hence it's never finished, that idea of Europe. We do not have any ontological eidos picture of Europe, a kind of imago Dei, but we consider Europe and its extension out of its nominal borders as a democratic Western civilization which grounds itself on the rationalization of the political reality. This rationalization has been some kind of historical process that somehow emerges in teleological way, namely to produce some kind of ultimate progressive political reality. So we are always into the domain of mediate things. Everything is mediated through something else. So democracy, which now has a form derived from the liberal standpoint, is intended to be a final solution for the political crisis and wars. On the other hand, Europe is born through the revolution, and there is another notion of democracy and freedom that could be established not before revolution, but only as its results. So I just want to see the dialectical relation between these two concepts that have such a significant meaning for continuation of the European legacy, democracy and revolution. Hence, my main question is revolutionary consciousness possible in the context of absolute democracy that proliferated itself as a universal yearning for united world as one pseudo-universal world machina or machina. Revolutionary thinking is a radical thinking, and it's based on a political ontology, as we said. Liberalism, it's quite the opposite. It tends to negate the political and to create a post-political perspective. Within theoretical and practical reign of globalization and universalization of the liberal democracy as a universal rational consensus, and this rationalism gives one crucial pair of two concepts that exclude each other. Political as antagonism and democratic procedures. Liberals as rationalized leftists create a notion of absolute democracy, and they shift the political being, political substance, into the sphere of morality. So the political is no longer a struggle among the antagonistic ideologies, but rather a matter of rationalism and individualism. So I just ask this question, and we are going to the discussion about this position. So one conservative thinker from the beginning of the 20th century, Carl Schmitt, criticized this standpoint with the core objection that individualism neglects the political, considering that the individual is the last referential point. As he asserts, the critical distrust of state and politics is easily explained by the principles of a system whereby the individual must remain terminus a quo and terminus ad quem. Liberalism, as a methodological individualism, completely ignores the state and politics and directs itself towards intellectual praxis. Or, as he claims, liberal thought evades or ignores state and politics and moves instead in a typical, always recurring polarity of two heterogeneous spheres, namely ethics and economics, intellect and trade, education and property. Simply, liberalism attempts to tie the political to the ethical and to subjugate it to economics, only to economics. So we could address the question, if this absolute inclusive rational consensus is possible, because we are living into absolutely mediate political reality, inclusion of all standpoints. Liberalism in its essence, as one political philosophical author, Chantal Mouffe, claims, is an attempt for negation of the political through its tendency to reduce itself to a liberal critique of the political and endless procedures. It has neither advanced a positive theory of state nor its own discovered how to reform the state. It has produced a doctrine of the separation and balance of power. A system of checks and controls of state and government. This cannot be characterized as either a theory of state or a basic political principle. Mouffe uses the Schmitt's criticism to find a way to establish a more advanced leftist strategy that keeps the concept of antagonism as a core of the very political. By the political, she means the dimension of antagonism, which she takes to be constitutive of human societies, while by politics she means the set of practices and institutions through which an order is created, organizing human coexistence in the context of conflictuality provided by the politics. Society is always permitted with political investments, and the democracy cannot be liberated in an apolitical way, as liberalists maintain. According to Schmitt, democracy implies homogeneity of the demos. It assumes a kind of identity which creates itself through a constitutive exteriority. So we must acknowledge the hegemonic nature of every social order and the fact that every society is the product of a series of practices attempting to establish order in a context of contingency. Democracy is not an inclusion. That's the claim of Chantal Mouffe, also of Schmidt. Every order is political and it's based on some form of exclusion. According to Mouffe, liberal democracy as a political project can be understood as an elimination of the rival models. It is apolitical by its core, and its goal is to be only possible model of the political thought and reality as the end of a seeking path. Antagonism, or agonism as Mouffe develops it, in this absolute perspective, is already sublime within the procedural nature of the parliamentarity. So democracy as a final state is only possible as functional democracy, collision of legitimistic democratical and political positions, confrontation of unessentialistic claims and moral values. The struggle between the left and the right is an essentialist form which has been overcome. If we follow Jacques Rancière, we could say that we live in a post-democracy, in conceptual legitimation of a democracy after the demos, a democracy that has eliminated the appearance, miscount, and dispute of the people, and it's thereby reducible to the sole interplay of state mechanisms and combination of social energies and interests. There is no cleavage between the forms of the state and the state of social ontology. The left accepted the importance of pluralism on the individual level, but neglected it on the political level, and the importance of liberal democratic institutions, and this is practically a kind of castration of the radical thinking. The belief in the historical necessity of transformation of the existing hegemonic order is exhibited in the museum. Hence, a question follows. Is the capitalism no longer hegemonic system, or something has changed within the revolutionary discourse? We have leftists that have accepted the current condition as an end of the history. Paradoxically, they have become the best students of Fukuyama's conservatism. But why and how did this shift happen? I'm trying to answer the question of Depeche Mode. According to Ulrich Beck, the progress is not a result of political struggles, so we must reject them as irrelevant for further development of the democracy. Beck justifies Fukuyama's metaphysical and ideological violence on the basis of rationalistic premises that we must accept common sense dictation, which is the victory of capitalism. Individuals in the condition of liberal democracy constitute themselves through open discursive exchange, not through class struggles and collisions. The apolitical becomes political, and it gets its political significance not in the reality of the political, but rather in the realm of language, regimes of vocabulary, discursive games of constructs, and deconstructive mannerism. Human rights and accidental identities now become substance for politics. This is at its core anti-political view of liberal democracy that misinterprets the real dynamics of the political. For Beck, the political constellation of industrial society is becoming apolitical, while what was apolitical in industrialism is becoming political. He speaks about postmodern subpolitical system of resistance, and what was intimate and private now becomes political. The classes are no longer politically substantial, and contemporary thought subjects everything under the prism of depolitization. the political program of a radical modernization is skepticism, according to these thinkers. Also, Giddens, one more thinker. Contemporary liberal democracy is a form of detraditionalization. Traditionalists and fundamentalists should not be allowed to participate within the dialogue because they position themselves contrary to the historical course. That's the words of Giddens. This is kind of democratization of the democracy, and this concept of radical democracy transforms the existing power relations and creates a new form of governing. The liberals are introducing the neutrality of the state. That's the dogma in the contemporary life of Europe. The neutrality of the state. Within this democracy, there is a place only for, as Schmidt asserts, ethical pathos, and economic calculation. For Giddens, the concept of classes has to be replaced with the concept of lifestyle, the concept of many lifestyles. Liberalism tries to connect everything to social solidarity and to partnerships between the state and civil society, considering the methodological individualism. Simply, a private person has no political enemies. Such a declaration can at most say that he would like to place himself outside the political community to which he belongs and continue to live as a private individual only. According to Giddens, we are experiencing the post-traditional society, life politics and self-actualization. All those issues concerning life politics cannot be expressed within the left-right framework because the political power is decentralized now, and we could say that dynamics of the individualism is the core of reflexive modernity. The democratic debate is now only a dialogue between individuals whose aim is to create new solidarities and extend the basis of active trust. Conflict can be pacified thanks to the opening up of a variety of public spheres. Through dialogue, people with very different interests will make decisions about the variety of issues which affect them and develop a relation of mutual tolerance, allowing them to live together. That's the concept of liberalism. And what is indisputably problematic here is that we are witnessing the unchallenged hegemony of neoliberalism with its claim that there is no alternative to the existing order. This is completely quasi-ideological claim because it gives conditions as arguments. That's the main sign that you are in circulus vitiosus. It's a logical error. This is completely quasi-ideological claim because it gives conditions as arguments. This is the argument. Since the collapse, disappearance of antagonism, politics without frontiers, without they, etc. Liberalism maintains that the political frontiers have dissipated, but also, as a liberal politics, it's trying to strengthen this situation and to proliferate it through the political and social institution. The power of the state is now used to convince the people that there is no power. Power of the state is now used to convince the people that there is no power. The pure ideological action is hidden behind the ethical appearance of judgment. Hence, the other is not a class anymore. It's not a part of the dialectical movement of the absolute. It is just a lifestyle. And from this standpoint, you judge him completely apolitically, using phrases as morally inelegable, outdated, non-progressive, etc. They present political, this is a quote of Mouffe, they present They present political debate as a specific field of application of morality and believe that it is possible to create in the realm of politics a rational moral consensus by means of free discussion. In this case, politics is apprehended not through economics but through ethics or morality. We are dealing with an exclusion justified in pseudo-scientific grounds. Simply, the political antagonisms are being formulated in terms of moral categories. And this is a sophistry. You are forced by the arguments of most popular sociologists today to accept the rationality of liberal democracy. So if one is opposed to it, automatically is being perceived as irrational, and this is a sign of moral backwardness. Beck is raving about some cosmopolitan capitalism that produces a universal humanity or even new anthropological nature, and ultimate implication is all society should adopt liberal democratic institutions, which are the only legitimate way to organize human coexistence. And there is no alternative to Westernization and its rationally acceptable results. And this is concept of humanity that achieved its highest level in establishing a liberal democratic society. Is this concept is a representation of the general humanity, and hence it should be applied to whole humanity, to all human local societies. So the question is how to transform the political condition of the social, or we are going to accept the end of history as rational liberation of revolutionary anxiety. Revolution implies a suspension of total democracy and its pseudo-universalism, because it's a call to conserve the status quo. If we have democracy as an ultimate paradigm, it is unlikely to have revolution. And vice versa, revolution assumes the condition of teleological suspension of democracy, namely, revolutionary consciousness is always directed towards transformation of the society through the political ontology. That political ontology lacks in the case of music and in the case of artists. Revolutionary consciousness assumes the political as a ground for the revolutionary consciousness formation. In reign of absolute democracy, you are simply directed to accept the unequal distribution of the wealth as given state without questioning its genealogy, and to accept the position of the repression of the poor into the system of the production dominated by the rich as a starting position. Win-win politics in which solutions could be found favoring everybody in society. The rich and the poor are just lifestyles. They are equal abstract positions in a procedurally regulated dialogue. Liberty and equality of all as the ethico-political principles of liberals as abstract principles create equality as a trans-temporal and trans-anthropological essence in every human being, despite his actual economical condition. A revolutionary must be convinced into the meaningless of the struggle. So that's what liberals do. So, the condition. Now I'll try to conclude with capturing the inner phenomenology of revolutionary consciousness, having in mind the very complex philosophical Kierkegaard's description of the situation of Abraham. Your study on theological faculty, so probably you know the story about Abraham. You know it? Abraham is the father of the faith. All monotheistic religions are Abrahamistic, because the Abraham is the father of all faiths. So, he is yearning for the child, and God gives him a promise that he will get a child, because he has to be a father of the faith. Not only a monk, but father. And after 100 years, when they are old together with Sarah, his wife, they gave a birth to Isaac. And after that, God is asking Abraham to sacrifice his son. And that's the Abrahamic situation. What to do? You cannot mediate horror religiosus. How to mediate that you heard the voice of God, that you have to sacrifice your son just to prove your absolute duty to God. It's not something that you talk to your wife or to others. The language is completely out of order when you want to talk about such a situation, about that religious horror. So, it's hard for Abraham, because he is in religious existence. According to Kierkegaard, humanity passed through 3 types of existence. Aesthetical existence, when we are young, we are in aesthetical existence. Someone maybe is in aesthetical existence on the end of his life. The second existence is ethical existence. And the third, the highest one to Kierkegaard, is religious existence. So, Abraham is in religious existence, but he has ethical as his temptation. Because Abraham just could say, okay, God, now you're playing tricks with me. I'm not going to kill my son, because that's the real ethical category. For non-believer, it's a killing of the son. It's not sacrifice. Sacrifice is a religious category. Could Abraham just say that? No, I'm going to kill myself because I don't want to kill my son, because it's also paradoxical against your laws, God, not killing. So what to do? It's a paradoxical situation that cannot be mediated through anything. So this is the situation of Abraham. In the liberalism, the dialectic of this paradoxical situation is neglected, and the movement is abolished. Acceptance of the movement is crucial for the revolutionary, but it brings anxiety to him due to the nature of the transformation of reality, but also because of the leap into the unknown that must be done. It's a risk, revolutionary, and revolution is a risk. A leap into something that must be done, but it is unknown. But in the same time, every revolutionary has this total democratic utopia as a kind of temptation. And I have in mind that this discourse that Kierkegaard uses to describe the situation of Abraham. Revolutionary is Abraham in the context of liberal democracy. For instance, Abraham's religious existence has ethical as a temptation, as a door to history and to historical revelation and salvation from the abyss of the religious leap. Abraham could be saved from the horror of religious existence that could not be mediated in any circumstances. The ethical expression for what Abraham did is that he meant to murder Isaac. the religious expression is that he meant to sacrifice Isaac. But precisely in this contradiction, as Kierkegaard put it, is the anxiety that can make a person sleepless. And yet, without this angst, on Danish language, Abraham is not who he is. In analogy, revolutionary has to sacrifice the commodity of the world, and even more, the very world of realized happiness and final total democracy which liberalists are speaking of. Total efficient democracy is the ultimate peace which puts an end to never-ending wars. And this is the final ethical reality. Revolutionary has this contemporary context of total democracy as a temptation, which means that you have to accept the status quo contrary to your conditions as a revolutionary, and that is the temptation. Revolutionary must give up from the revolution because it is a risk of differential otherness. It is an eschatological thinking. On the other hand, this post-political perspective and the total democracy as a state of ultimate abolition of the time provides a revelation from the existential revolutionary horror. Revolutionary must reject his existence to accept the liberalism, and for Kierkegaard, the deeper natures never forget themselves and never become anything other than what they were. And the revolutionary have to recollect everything, but this recollection is precisely the pain. And yet, in infinite resignation, he is reconciled with existence. But why is the temptation so strong for contemporary, pure, leftistic, revolutionary consciousness? The next paragraph this is the paragraph of Fear and Trembling. If you never read that book, just read it. It's maybe the best dialectical, lyrical book of Kierkegaard about horror of religious existence. I have a plan. If someone wants to study theology, I will give 1 year of propedeutic to read Schopenhauer and Nietzsche. If after that reading he is still a believer, then he will be good theologian. That's why I think people should read more now than to watch pictures on PowerPoint or something like that. Because we are dealing with mind, dealing with words. That's the, how to say, that's why woman is more complicated thing. Because it reacts on words more. Man reacts on body. And because this is it's a feministic joke. One day God creates the man, and he watched him and said, I could do it better. And then he creates the woman. That's the feministic joke here. So, let's read this. It's a strong paragraph of this Kierkegaard. And it's very great to see why I think that revolution is no longer possible in human history. The ethical as such is the universal. And as the universal, it applies to everyone, which from another angle means that it applies at all times. It rests immanent in itself, has nothing outside itself that is its telos, goal, and purpose, but is itself the telos for everything outside itself. And when the ethical has absorbed this into itself, it goes not further. The single individual sensationally and physically qualified in immediacy is the individual who has this telos in the universal, and it is his ethical task continually to express himself in this, to annul his singularity in order to become the universal. As soon as the single individual asserts himself in his singularity before the universal, he sins. And only by acknowledging this can he be reconciled again with the universal. Every time the single individual, after having entered the universal, feels an impulse to assert himself as the single individual, he is in a spiritual trial from which he can work himself only by repeatedly surrendering as the single individual in the universal. So if we applied this to situation of revolutionary, we see how the condition of revolutionary consciousness is abolished. Kierkegaard is speaking about the religious existence, but this could be applied to the revolutionary existence. The ethical is the goal for everything because it is universal. And when the thing is absorbed into the ethical, that thing cannot go any further. Revolutionary experienced the new situation of liberal reality by repeatedly surrendering as the single individual in the universal. That's the temptation that liberates him from the anxiety of choice and unfinished reality. In liberalism, we just become individuals due to the new political reality. Individualism is the universalism, an abstract concept applicable to everyone. It is produced by the end of history, and it produces the continuation of that reality. So existence is something unfinished and produces itself into time as a singularity that cannot be derived from any social relation, neither from any universalism. The ethical is of the same nature as a person's eternal salvation, which is his telos forevermore and at all times, since it would be a contradiction for this to be capable of being surrendered, that is teleologically suspended. Because as soon as this is suspended, it is relinquished, whereas that which is suspended is not relinquished, but is preserved in the higher, which is its telos. So contemporary leftists slide to liberalism and its total state to its conservatism through the acceptance of current stage of capitalism, because they have stopped to see meaning in the uncertain revolutionary action. They accepted the concept of total state or annul of the political pluralism. Their consciousness is caught up into the game movement between ethics, intellectually, and economics, trade. And from this polarity, they attempt to annihilate the political as a domain of conquering power and repression. The concept of private law serves as a lever, and the notion of private property forms the center of the globe, whose poles, ethics, and economics are only the contrasting emissions from this central point. This is a quotation from Schmidt. So, leftists become the most conservative thinkers. Simply, you know, the Fukuyama, the end of history and the last man. There is no need for seeking better reality, social or political, because we get to the last point, westernization of the whole world. Democratic procedures, nothing, you cannot, because they say capitalism and communism. No, there were no communism ever. Because if you want to say that was something somewhere communism, you have to explain how can you think communism and state at the same time. If you have a state, then you don't have communism. If you have communism, you don't have state. To say communistic state is like you say like pleonasm, like oxymoron. Wood and metal, or metal wood, something like that. But that's the sophistry of Fukuyama. Capitalism, communism. Communism was blown away, and only capitalism left. And total liberal democracy, when you don't have classes, left, right, it's completely abolished. You have lifestyle. If you are rich, you are a lifestyle. That's your lifestyle. If you are poor, you're not born in political necessity, but it's only your lifestyle. You choose to be poor. And when you go to discuss with rich, you accept that situation as a starting point. You must accept it. That's the liberalism of the new leftists. So, in order to become a father of faith, Abraham needed to resist the temptation of the ethical. Revolutionary, in the same way, will have to suspend democracy teleologically in order to reinvent and reinvest the concept of power. It's Zizek. It's like a peeping Tom. So probably the revolution is one obsolete and redundant idea, even for the revolutionaries. The liberal democracy has no further proceedings into another form of state. So the revolutionary who accepts this condition cannot go any further. In the reality of total democracy, as an optimal condition, revolutionary consciousness is the last crisis, stronghold, and just one irrational and politically irrelevant act of the last exhausted avant-garde of European legacy. So, yesterday with Dan, we were in some kind of investigation. So we took this picture in the toilet in one cafe bar in Olomouci. That's the situation of the toilet. So probably we are going to be nothing more but showmen who speaks about the revolutionary as some kind of lifestyle that can express itself only through art or through infinite academic debates about everything, from Avatar to vegan moment, and to everyone, and to everybody, and to everything in this world, who will be united in one total democratic state or power state above all. So, Rage Against the Machines are so wrong. Revolution is already dead because we have killed the revolutionary. Thank you. So, if anyone have questions or some comments.
I would say something. Hi. I'll start with this last picture. Probably has been put into the toilet, to be easier to do the job. That's why. Is this photo? It's just my individual opinion. I couldn't agree more in your, while you were speaking about all of this, Professor. And I could just add three I would say three things. Like, the first one would be like, the future is stupid. The second is watch more TV, and into the TV I'll put everything, the media, and then the evolution is over. That would be my. Thank you.
Let's not be so pessimistic. Maybe it's a good idea for revolutionary to accept this temptation. Maybe it's good. The wars will stop. But he must abolish the condition of his psychology. Because Nietzsche, he is thinking into the categories of quantums of power. Everything in universum is some kind of equilibrium between different powers. So our body is equilibrium. We have viruses even now, but we are in equilibrium. So one forces are controlling other forces in our body. Society is also some kind of quantum of power, an equilibrium. So this total democracy maybe is really final frontier. I don't know. Maybe this is the real life in the end of history. Maybe Fukuyama is right. But then let's stop talking about the revolution. It's a redundant idea because revolutionary is killed. The idea is a virus, but every virus, if he has no body, cannot be transmitted. If you ruin the body or you get vaccine, then you don't have transmitter for the idea. So the revolutionary bears the revolution, not vice versa, as in Rage Against the Machine. So maybe this is a good thing. Let's not be so pessimistic.
I have a few comments of your presentation. So the first one about your previous discussion, who said that virus is bad. This is the first one. The second one, I want to remind you that woman isn't a thing, it is a human. Like, absolutely. That you said the woman is a more perfect thing as a man. She is a human, and men are too.
Maybe because in Slavic words, there is a word tvar.
Mm-hmm.
Tvar.
Mm.
It's a creation. It's not a thing, but it's tvar. But when I
Let it be creation, but not a thing at all.
Probably I use wrong term because English is not my mother tongue. It's not something that.
Sure, sure. But we should remember that she is a human.
For me, all
yeah.
One
Nice. Yes, the next one point that you said that to be believers, we should read more, as I get it, right?
To read more something that confronts religion.
Sure.
Like Nietzsche, like Schopenhauer.
So you...
it's my temptation. I'm always tempted to be a Schopenhauer.
So you say that believers are more intelligent because they read more, or no. I just don't get your point about reading.
That probably maybe they have richer internal life.
I don't get your point.
You know why?
No.
Because they have religious existence. They pass through aesthetical, probably ethical, and they have a religious existence. And according to Kierkegaard, to be in a religious existence is the highest thing that you can get. Because only in an aesthetical existence and in religious existence, the individual stands
But there is a very big, like, this is, you should say that religious people and believers are very, not opposite, but not very close terms. And religious people, I won't say that believers and religious people.
We went to a ground of groups.
Sure.
Religious existence is applicable only to a person life, not to a group life. Religious people.
Religious people are group, and believers are something subjective and personal.
Yes, I believe in a strong existential and personal life. And when I say religious people, I mean religious singular existence. And their life cannot be mediated through nothing. Probably also neither to any religious discursive collective faith proclamation or something like that. We live in constant personal connection with God or not, or we are agnostic, or we are
like, I don't know, I don't need to read more to believe or not to believe. Like, I don't think that it depends.
It's like it's like shaping your mind. In Macedonian we have one old saying: it depends on what you're sharpening your mind.
Sure, I read more literature atheistic and become more atheistic. Like,
no.
Yes,
No.
It's my
No.
personal experience.
No.
And the last one, I don't think that absolute democracy can be. I don't know why this discourse exists at all, because nothing is perfect, and I'm just asking why this discourse exists, because it is very, I think, obvious that nothing is perfect and absolute democracy can't be here.
Yes, absolutely. But how we stopped in that level that we see that is not perfect, but let's stop seeking for perfectness. I think we stopped as a humankind. So these liberalists, they want to put the condition of absolute democracy and total democracy in whole world. And that's the temptation for revolutionary. Because if he wants to get his existence, he must teleologically suspend the democracy in one period of action, and then to establish a new form of democracy. He must teleologically suspend it. That's the condition. But this total democracy is a realm of quitting the wars, because the revolution is a war. It's not something that you do, well, I change my hair, I change my, gender. It's a revolution.
You
Revolution is political reality.
Revolution is liberal thing?
No.
Not?
No, I don't think that is liberal. Because a revolution just picks the battle to give freedom after the seeking, not to get freedom for, as some kind of pre-given condition.
No, this is stupid.
He must produce the battle for freedom. But to produce a battle, you must suspend the democracy. The rich for the poor. It's not a lifestyle, it's a class. Wealth of the world, of the capitalist, has its genealogy. It's from feudal times. Nobody is born rich. But that's why Pierre-Joseph Proudhon one anarchist, you know, Pierre-Joseph Proudhon. He said, it's only one war for the richness, for the wealth. It's a steal, nothing else, just a steal. You steal the wealth.
The Soviet Revolution wasn't fighting about freedom or something else. It was fighting for authoritarian regime. I wouldn't say that they
Yes,
were fighting.
That's why I think it's complicated thing.
Obvious.
If revolutionary consciousness, you must suspend it. You must go through the authoritarian time of ruling just to establish something after. And it's a complicated thing. And that's why I think maybe it's a evolution, Bobby. I don't know.
Changing of regime.
I don't want to the point of philosophy is not to give answers, just to radically put some questions. That's the matter of philosophy. That's why we are dealing with philosophy, to radically put a question. I just put a question. Is this temptation for revolutionary consciousness is justified? Probably. The war will end, we will live in welfare, and like princess and prince, happily ever after. But all life ends up with the horror, I mean the final act. And usually that act is bloody for everyone, for each human being. So it's a utopia for me. Also the total democracy and revolutionary act. But I think that it's a completely redundant idea in the perspective, in the history of Europe and Western civilization. It's no more relevant idea. That's my opinion. Because of all this, because of total democracy, because of the situation, because of, you know, spectators, Zizek, and this is, we were yesterday in Ponorka. This is the toilet of Ponorka. And Ponorka is typical left, you know, everybody is chilling, it's anarchistic stage, it's great. I grew up in such places. I grew up reading atheistic literature. And after that I became more believer. After atheistic, after Schopenhauer and after Nietzsche.
I guess it just depends on the type of revolution, because I guess that in Ukraine the revolution of 2014 just saved our country. So it just depends of type, because we won't fighting. We fight it with regime. We fight for democracy. So it depends.
Probably. In Macedonia, during the Ottoman Empire, they were revolutionaries. And they were fighting for the state on its own. So is that revolution?
And the revolution of USSR...
To change regime of one state with the regime of other state. Because they are all regimes. We could contemplate the regimes in gradually or something like that. But the regime is a regime. To live in a state is impossible without the regimes. Because if you said we are living in state, but we are living as state does not exist. It's totally irrational to say it like that. When we live in state, you have regimes.
I'm happy with the democratic regime in Ukraine today.
Yes, yes.
I guess a big part of people are.
Yes, but that's why we don't see the distribution of the power in the world. Because the power is not something that you create. According to Nietzsche, it's something that derives from the constellation of forces in the universe. also, but also in the realm of human beings. This is some kind of power relation according to Foucault. You are sitting there and you listen to me. But if you, probably yesterday, if you see me in Pulmurka, you will say, well, I will listen to that guy. If you don't know me before, maybe I will be like Don Quixote or Socrates. Socrates was terrible. Boring person. He was standing in front of agoras and told to everyone, let's discuss about this, let's discuss. So probably everyone were, that's the Socrates, let's go this way. But this is the power situation. I'm blabbering about revolution and total democracy, and you will listen. Faculty, what is faculty? It's the hierarchy. Everything in human life is hierarchy and regime. I don't see anything.
Sure.
So when we say we fight for the freedom from the Turks, our revolutionary, and after that what? To establish national state. What about the others in that national state? You as Ukrainians, you don't say, well, we have Russians in Ukraine. What about them? You know? It's a complicated thing. Because we think that we had right to fight against the Ottoman Empire and to establish Macedonian national state. But when you establish state, then you say, well, official language is Macedonian. I as a Macedonian, I have a freedom to speak my own language. But someone who lives also in my state, who is Albanian, he has to speak Macedonian language also.
Yes.
Yes?
He said he has to. What's wrong? It's a state language, so you should know. You shouldn't speak, but you have to know.
Nowadays, Macedonia.
Yes.
You know the ideas of Macedonia revolutionary from 1925. Vladislav Kovachev said, let's create Balkanian Federation. Something like European Union now. And in Macedonia, all people, all nations, minorities, let's create a state with official languages of everyone. So let's have 10 official languages. That was the idea of Macedonian Revolution, but they were leftists, mostly anarchists. So they create such a notion because it's an uneven distribution. Yes, that's the state language. Now we are speaking English. We do not speak our own language. So the English is some kind of lingua franca for all scientific researches, connection, and whatever. But that's the idea of Foucault and of Nietzsche. Whenever you go and create some body, human, or organization, or society, or war allies, or something, it's based on constellation of power. In some kind of equilibrium. If you de-establish that power, then it will create another body that is different constellation of powers. So we do not see anything that abolishes this situation of the world. And probably this total democracy is something that could save us from the wars, but we see that wars continues. They continue on the horizon of the world. And probably it will be end of the world some point in the future. So I'm not pessimistic at all when I say that probably will be the end of the world. I'm not pessimistic at all. I'm pretty optimistic when I say this. Other thinking probably is pessimistic to say, well, we are entering into the beautiful cake, cocaine, and freedom for everyone that hold will be, that will be enter into the final phase of human, you know, I don't believe in that.
This is very philosophical, but you like the language discourse was a little bit historical different than you think it is in Ukraine, because we without languages, without our own language, we wouldn't exist at all.
I don't argue with you on
Sure.
that level. It's normal.
Sure.
Absolutely, I'm pro-Ukrainian. Absolutely, because the Russian invasion is just an invasion. But probably during the history, it's every state is a complicated thing that arise from some kind of constellation of forces and powers. And that's what we must calculate when we are trying to grasp the holistic picture. But probably that's not possible at all. We are not God.
We should choose some unreachable destination and just try to reach it, and it's all. Thank you so much for the discussion.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Professor, I was not, as you said, pessimistic in my while I was speaking. Actually, I am optimistic, and we must be, all of us as a humans, because we don't have other choice but to be optimistic. My point was that we are going in some wrong direction, and probably, like always in the history, we are not going linear but cyclistic. That's why we are now in that position to go in the wrong direction. But in some point, maybe after a few centuries, then we will take the good course again. So that was my point. But for now, just watch more TV, because we don't have to think. It's a luxury, you know, as Fromm said. So thank you.
once again. It's a Friday, so we have another second volume or second part of the presentation, because Leandone was already talking to you 2 days ago, I assume, 2 days ago. And today we are going to talk about the crisis of the journalism and his observations. So thank you very much for your actually concluding lecture, because the last one are colleagues of ours from our department, our PhD study students. So you are the last one, so the best at the end. Yeah. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the nice words. Floor is mine. Let's finish the story that we started on Monday, or no Monday, Wednesday. It was about the intervening of ethics and journalism. Why? Because journalism is very important for ethics, for disseminating the truth, for disseminating the major ethical tendencies in contemporary world, and vice versa. Ethics is very important for journalism, as I spoke on Wednesday, because there is no journalism without ethics, without professionalism, without the standards of the professionalism that comes together. So I'm going to continue with that thought today also, when I'm going to speak about the journalist as a moral subject. Why? Because how can you disseminate, or through whom you will disseminate your truth, tendencies, and etc., or better to say from the other side, who is that point according to, or who is that subject, better to say, who is that subject who has to go and act through certain criterias, so his job to be a professional one and can be called as a profession, journalism in this context. So it's all about the journalist look through the eyes of ethics as a moral subject, or better to say, the crisis of the journalist as a moral subject. And my main thesis is how to survive, because more and more we don't have it anymore, but we have to have it. Otherwise, journalism as a profession will die. It doesn't matter it is a profession or not. It doesn't matter if it has its own criteria according to which it acts. It doesn't matter anymore. So, what I'm going to speak about, first part, the journalist as a moral subject, then his crisis as a moral subject, and instead of conclusion, I'll try to give you my thoughts about how to save the journalist today. Okay. The journalist as a moral subject, normatively, yes, journalist is a journalistic subject, decision maker and man of action, the one who moves and leads the communication action, one that has supervision and influence, one who consciously directs his activities and tries to fulfill his professional roles that are given to him as an opportunity due to his professional competence. And when you open any dictionary, you will find one or several of these definitions. Who is the journalist? He is the one who oversees the fundamental processes in the media reality, collects information, requesting and receiving, selects events and facts, shapes reports, choice of gender and language means. So the place of the subject is assigned to him by his professional journalistic competence, according to which he differs from one person from other persons who are involved in the mass communication processes. So the journalist, as I may quote Splichal from Slovenia, the definition is that the journalist is the most important person who professionally collaborates in that processes. As the main roles, he has been assigned the role of an observer from one side, who gathers the news, and from the other side, the role of the describer who presents the news also, as Patrick and Caffey would say. And these are not the only roles he receives, nor does he perform them as an isolated individual. This is so because on the media scene he acts with other persons who perform activities in relation to their roles according to the roles that belong to him, to them. So hence their functions, goals and tasks differs. So it is important for the journalist to know how to obtain a critical distance from anyone at that point. At the same time, according to the foundation of journalistic ethics, he is required to treat man as a person. Who is that man? Which is the person with whom the journalist establishes a relationship in his work? Who is that man? To whom is the journalist responsible while performing his work? Also a major question. It's not a scheme. To whom from all of them, with he established a kind of relationship, journalist is the most responsible out? 3 questions. And one connection. Respect, according to the nature, is deserved by every member of human society. This means that the journalist is obliged to respect not only others, but also himself. In order to fulfill this obligation, which my favorite philosopher Kant would say and calls it like duty to oneself. One must develop self-respect, the virtue of self-respect. The yardstick for this respect will not be his special merits compared to others, but his belonging to human race. Very simple. His own person is an object of respect which the journalist can rightly demand from his employer, source of information, presenter, and other participants in mass communication, and that usually today he forgets. If he abandons the claim to moral virtue for his own sake, then he commits and injures to duty, would Kant will say. Or, better as he defined, false moral humility or spiritual creeping. If he is underestimated in comparison with others, then he resists duty, although he may think that he gains a great intrinsic value by doing so. If he lowers his moral value and uses it as means to achieve some favor, I don't know which, but to try to achieve, then by doing so he expresses disrespect of man toward his person. He cannot he cannot expect someone to respect him if he doesn't respect himself. That is the main point. So, the journalist has, because of this ability in us, which we call it consciousness, a duty toward himself as a natural judge of himself, would say Socrates. Consciousness is consciousness of the inner judgment in man, before which his thoughts accuse and forgive to others, to himself, and follows a man like his shadow when he thinks to run away. He cannot run away, says Kant. Every man has a conscience. His inner judge, who looks at everything, treats him and causes him awe. So the journalist has a duty to himself to increase his moral perfection. The moral state in which he can be found is virtue or moral direction in struggle. The journalist cannot, at any time of his existence in the sensual world, achieve a complete exposition regarding the directions of the moral law. He can only reach it in the process toward infinity. So the moral perfection that a journalist can achieve is virtue, which Kant calls lawful orientation due to respect for the law. So the journalist increases his moral perfection by following a virtue. That is the second main thing. The right of the public to be informed has a great important ethical dimension because it gives journalists a special responsibility. Journalist acts as a representative of the public. Public is the main keeper of the moral virtues and values as they are. So this means that the primary responsibility of the journalist is the responsibility of the public. Would say J. Black. So the reliability of journalistic reporting is shown in the ability of journalism to respect the primal loyalty to the public. Would confirm also by Melvin. Basic News Writing. It is called the book. So the journalist places the responsibility to the public above and aside of loyalty to the employer, political party, or friends, for example. As the signers of the Munich Declaration agree that the journalistic responsibility towards the public takes precedence over any other responsibility, and this especially applies to their employees and the government. Third big thing. Next, the responsibility toward the public is first and irreplaceable, because ethical decision-making in journalism basically refers to the principle of journalistic duty toward to the public. We must not treat the media public as an invisible or confused, for example, multitude, which is primarily a multitude of isolated individuals. Because it is composed of specific people. Every piece of information which should meet ethical requirements requires us to see its participant and to treat them as an individuals, not as a multitude, says the resolution of the Council of Europe on journalistic ethics from 1993. Yes, 1993. So the right that the mass media have in relation to the freedom of reporting, according to the conclusion of the same resolution, is serve the recipients, which are the people. The journalist is the most responsible toward them. When the journalist collects and processes the information, he must or she must be aware of whom he does that and to whom he addresses. He answers to him, to them. He is responsible to him, to them. So, it can be concluded, this part, it can be concluded that addressing oneself, recipients, and source of information and objects of journalistic reporting as individuals means that the journalists recognize and accepts responsibility. So, if I may quote Buber, Martin Buber, the true responsibility is where the true response is. And the true response of the journalist to the recipient, the source of the information, and the persons of the journalistic report is the same as in the relationship of person to person. And that's it, how we look or should look journalist as a moral subject. What happens now? The crisis of the journalist as a moral subject, because he is not fulfilling this kind of responsibilities, doesn't takes and doesn't applies the same one is in his work. Why? Because he is a great listener and very good employee guy from the owner of the media, or maybe his political party or so, or somebody else. So the basic questions that daily reflect our questioning about this, why the crisis of the journalist is a moral subject, regarding the essence and meaning of this activity are generally the same as before, as I spoke on Wednesday. How can journalism be a profession? Which are the main points of becoming a profession? Having a responsibility, taking responsibility and applying them into a practice, everyday practice. So the questions are basically the same. 100, 200, 300 years ago, it doesn't matter. They are the same. What is journalism and what are the journalistic tasks? What roles does it have and who should it serve? The same. In other words, who is a journalist? What is his primary activity? In whose interest does he act and to whom he is responsible? Of course, the answers to these questions, as before, are neither simple, especially if we compare the journalistic practice we encounter today with the greater and necessary requirement for quality journalism. This is so because the journalist is the normative quality journalism, in a normative quality journalism, which was discussed so far, should take and has taken the place of the professional competent source of the communication process. In other words, the same entity that should have control over the fundamental processes in the media reality. From here, however, the practice of the journalistic discourse shows that the journalist in all stages of this process slowly loses the place of subject, first of all, understood as the foundation, barrier of the action. It can be freely stated that in modern journalism today, this foundation is changing. In support of this, the knowledge derived from the diagnosis on what should be decided by journalists in accordance with their competence, today is increasingly, although often covertly, decided by the others. Its role is assumed by the owners of the media, capital, information sources, and or political power holders as multinational companies, advertisers, politicians, public relations, and etc. That's why he loses his status as a moral subject, as a subject, first of all, and then as a moral subject. With this, the journalist as a subject, reporter, disappears. His place in the control over the processes in the media reality is taken over by impersonal structures and mechanisms of power, owners of capital and holders of power. So in this context, most of the journalistic work can be characterized as passive processing of information. That's why, or the so-called copy-paste journalism. That is, reporters are not journalists, but those who successfully impose their interest in reporting, those who directly, as owners, or indirectly, as the most influential sources of information and opinions, as advertisers and sponsors, control the media. In this way, journalists becomes servants of their interest and increasingly becoming the one who carry out the decision takers, instead of being the one who decide as decision makers. So the role is changed. That's why they're servant now, according to McManus, who's responsible for journalism. So according to what is more than visible from the trends in the development of the journalism today, if we take into account the basic assumption in the activity of the journalists today, the desire for sensationalistic invasion of privacy and the declaration of the same as a journalistic task, as we spoke on Wednesday during the panel when we spoke about the conspiracy theories, the thesis put forward is that it is not only a crisis of the identity of journalism, which actually means a crisis of one profession, but, and above all, the crisis of the self-identification of journalism as a crisis of identity between the journalist and the journalistic discourse, and especially about the crisis of autonomy, also of the journalistic ethics. The thesis more rigidly presented, it is not a question of a crisis of ethics in journalism, but above all a crisis of the subject, especially a crisis of the journalist as a subject. I think this is confirmed by the fact that in this postmodern era, due to the realization that no one can have complete control, the demand of the journalist to control the situation by his own becomes disputable. This follows from the fact that the postmodern shift means a distrust of the Cartesian ego, as well as a violation of the notion of the transcendental subject that were at the center of the most European philosophy from René Descartes up till the period of postmodern. This means that the postmodern point of view, does not recognize the possibility of self-establishment of the subject, which brings a completely different picture of the journalist in the sense of a subject, changing the prevailing understanding of the journalistic identity and journalism as well. Hence, considering the crisis of ethics in journalism in the light of the postmodern age, a relativistic, pragmatistic, and Machiavellian approach to journalism are increasingly recognized, while the subject disappears, and with it the main tool of the journalists, which is, you're all sleeping, the question. The question disappears. Imagine there is a press conference of some major theme. As a public, from the other side, I usually I'm putting a question. Why does not The journalists puts a question. It's like they are kind of form of PR to someone. They are not collecting information for me because they are not putting question. Without question, there is no journalism. There is copy-paste journalism. That it is not the right form of the journalism. Where is the question? The main problem. The journalist is not a subject, and he no longer asks question. He doesn't care. There are no questions, which means no answers. There is no responsibility, because there is no answers, which is why ethics falls into a crisis. It is about a crisis of the subject, a crisis of the personal fulfillment, a crisis of the journalist as a profession, as a person. In more detailed, I think it looks like this: a crisis of the identity of the journalism and the postmodern crisis of the subject in journalism. Key questions that I'm going to speak further. So, according to the previously stated thesis, in this first part, a crisis of the identity of the journalism, the existence of a crisis of the identity of journalism, which should be especially searched for and investigated in the light of the crisis that occurred in the transition from the modern to postmodern era, namely the declaration of the end of the journalism, is the result of the declaration of the end of what my colleague a while ago spoke about. And that is the end of the ideology, for example, Daniel Bell, the declaration for the end of the history, he mentioned the Francis Fukuyama, the end of the declaration of the end of the science, John Horgan, and the world itself, John Leslie, for example, which is only a warning of the historical processes in late capitalism that shows the dependence of journalism as a cultural practice on the economical principles of marketing and the new informational technology. Peter Dalger. End of the quote. How that looks in practice. When I asked my editor, when I was working in the media, there is very interesting press conference about Macedonia towards NATO, towards EU, something like that was. And I asked my editor, I will cover this. How come you're young? I have a dozen questions. No, you will cover something different. Why, I said? Because you have questions. And my media will be only one time presented during that series of press conferences that are going to be. This is the first one, and there is 9 more this week. So we will be represented there only once. They will kick you off. They don't like to be asked because they have to give an answers. And they don't have an answers. But it doesn't matter. You have to do copy-paste, and that's good. Why? Because people are listening. I'm selling the product. I don't care anymore. In theory, how does it look? In this sense, to continue, as Peter Dalgers talks about, decline of the classical journalism. Or, for example, Robert Snow, about the post-journalistic era, about Joe Bardoyle, about the feeling that, that there is the end of critical journalism. It is approaching the period in which we thought that the problem of the public sphere will be solved with the professionalism. We have to go further, but we didn't solve this one yet. Like a bad housewife, always collects the dust under the carpet. She's good housewife for a while, for a period in which the carpet will go horizontally, okay. But if you put all the garbage down under the carpet eventually will go like this. At the first period, you're a good housewife, good wife, etc., blah, blah, blah. But after a while, you're very, very nasty, bad. Why? Because you're not cleaning. There is only a mask to the whole process. It's not process by itself. I know the question that you're going to put. I'm not disrespecting the women by this. It's only slap she. I can't use he. Why? Because I'm digging in the yard. She's cleaning inside. Sorry. Physically, I have to do that. Biology. Biology. I always say biology. I can't change the biology. That's right. So, in confirmation of these statements is the sketching of the situation in which the journalistic organizations are faced with economical problems that threaten journalistic autonomy, and they subordinate journalism to market pressure. You are not going to be paid this month. Why? We didn't collect enough money. We didn't sold any good product. Why? Because you asked too many questions during the press conference trying to criticize. Just be copy-paste. We are selling something. We are depending from that money. And I know how it is because why I left the radio, especially the radio station, because 6 months I didn't get any kind of payment. So it was obviously collapsing of the system. And eventually after that they sold the radio station, the frequency. Never paid me. They took all the money, the owners. But still, it was economically not sustainable because of the market pressure. These problems, together with the political problems, one of the owners was from SDS, from the party that was ruling the state at that time, but didn't save the radio. These problems, together with the political, yes, that shake society as a whole, open the question of the identity of the journalism and the journalist and its place in the public sphere. Why do we need journalism? And plastically pictured, it is like when you are in a car trying to listen some music on the radio and there is a guy who's always talking about, come on, stop talking, play the list. Why? In the public sphere. No one wants to listen to you. The crisis of the identity signifies, first of all, the fate of the truth of information and public reporting at a time when popular culture directs journalism toward a mixture of entertainment, attraction, and sensation. That's why stop talking. If you're not talking about Monica Bellucci, stop talking. Play the list, play the music. It is especially emphasized with the more difficult determination of the border between the serious and the popular press, which has the consequence of mixing their rules of games, which makes it impossible to determine the true identity of the journalism. In summary, we can say that precisely the end of the classical journalism complies the question of the boundaries between journalism and quasi-journalism. Every fool guy with a microphone. To repeat the main thesis from Wednesday. More precisely, the crisis of the journalistic identity is manifested in unrecognizability of the journalistic discourse due to, first of all, mixing journalism, an activity for the common good, which has the primary function of informing citizens, and so, with quasi-journalism, an activity that serves to gain profit, power, and authority. Second, blurring, I would say erasing, it's better term, the boundaries between serious and popular press. Thus, the recognition of identity and the future of journalism are threatened. Namely, the border between journalism and quasi-journalism are more and more difficult to determine, while the future of journalism is more and more difficult to forecast. In crisis are exactly those elements that communicators often cite as key settings of the profession, and autonomy and ethics stand out among them. So in this case, it looks like this. This erase the boundaries, the borders, among other things, indicating the crisis of journalism, of ethics in journalism. Journalism in different parts of the world is increasingly encountering difficult problems and opposes of deprofessionalization. So the global dilemmas about the future of journalism, which due to the general erosion of already achieved ethical standards leads to deprofessionalization, much earlier than it metamorphosized from a semi-profession ended in a profession, are presented in every journalistic microcosmos. You can see it everywhere. For example, just watch the movie. It's a bad movie, but the idea is good. The realization of the idea is bad, but still, the effect of the butterfly. The first, not the second part, the first part. It's a good illustration of this. The rapid transformation of the media from politically controlled to free and market-oriented media is certainly the most responsible for that. Thus, as Hanno Hartz would say, the mass media rarely achieve the desired balance between responsible journalism and profit marketing work. That is the general conclusion. So, reporting in market journalism is subject to a flood of distorted images that are transmitted in a manner reminiscent of the Wild Wild West. Looks like that. Whereby the one who is aggressive and first will be the first who will have the news. He wins the fight. So, because television requires spectacles, this means that the information and communication have to become pure images. And in the mixing lies the same danger. You can take picture in Olomouci and you would say, I'm saluting you from Praga. Who will notice the difference? If you've never been to Olomouci or in Praga, who will know the difference? You will go liking under the picture, yeah? It's same in journalism. Having the picture is the first thing. So, because television requires spectacle, this means that the information and communication have to become pure images. And in the mixing lies the danger, not only of reducing reality to images, but mixing images with reality. It can be stated that the image has become more important than the essence. Actually, I don't care what says under the picture. Greetings from Praga. I am in Praga? No, I don't care. But you look very nice. Or perhaps Praga looks very nice behind you. It isn't Praga, it's Olomouci. Doesn't care. Only the picture is Only the picture is important, nothing else. So there is no news, no information, nothing that is important from the aspect of the journalism, journalist, and journalistic ethics. Because today everyone can choose an embodiment that is an image that they want to present in accordance with their interest and economical possibilities. I will choose what to publish. Maybe I'm not going to publish to Facebook now the last day of our stay in Olomouci, Sipus network, and etc. I will just put several pictures and said we had good times, and put the toilet from Podnurka, how do you call? Great time in Olomouc. How do you analyze that? I know how my faculty will analyze, but what is up to the others? Maybe I have to have two different profiles in the future, one for the faculty, one private, because I'm very interested how which one is going to be more analyzed, and especially on which manner, in which manner. And you will see that through the short comments down the picture, if there is anyone. Let's continue. The former means that the basic orientation is the status of the news as a commodity that responds to market demands, presented as a set of special interest that I have. McManus would say in Market-Driven Journalism from 1994. Why? Market-oriented journalistic discourse based its relationship to reality on the norm of market success, which means it indulges in those ways of decision-making and action that will contribute to the fulfillment of economical and/or political goals, which in turn leads to the denial of the foundation of journalism. So the crisis of journalistic ethics appears to be the predominance of the norms of the market efficiency over professional journalistic principles. The decision of what is news and what it isn't depends only on a cost-benefit analysis, not on the criteria of quality journalistic discourse. With that, the news become completely wrapped in a shiny packaging of leisure and entertainment, and thus becomes trivial, but as such it does not serve the interest of the public. It says enough that the market approach of journalism encouraged the erosion of central professional ethics, claims John McManus. But he never been to Macedonia, for example. Why? All the Turkish TV series, for example. Does all the people are reaching for that? No, but we still have it. So one television is selling them to another, to another, to another, but not selling the TV series. They sell us as a consumers, if you are a consumer to that TV series. And the most of the older population usually are uneducated and etc. Because they are synchronized. You don't have to read down. If you are uneducated, you need only to hear, and that's it, it's enough. That is, journalistic unethical attracts the audience. Market journalism aims to create unethical, but at the same time, very profitable images. Hence, the crisis of ethics, as we understand journalism, first of all, is a crisis of the creators of those images, so the crisis of the subject by itself. Because in journalism, normatively, the journalist is the one who is a journalistic subject, the maker of decision and actions, and the one who drives and leads the communication action, he should have control and influence consciously to direct his own activity and to try to fulfill his professional roles that are given to him as an opportunity due to his professional competence. It should serve the fundamental processes in media reality, namely the collection of information, the selection of events and facts, the shaping of reports. In other words, the place of the subject gives him exactly the professional journalistic competence in relation to which he differs from others who are involved in the communicational process. I'm repeating that again. Why? The journalist is the most important person who professionally cooperates in that process. The most important roles attributed to him are, above all, the role of to be an observer, who collects the news, and describer who will present the news. The same, of course, he does not perform as an isolated individual, to repeat again, but he acts with the others on the media scene, which, according to their roles, perform certain activities that belong to them, and etc., the whole process. For example, the spokesman, PR, performs tasks related to public relations, and he or she is responsible for achieving the goals of that activity, whose functions, goals, and tasks differs, because the journalist should have or have a critical distance. Journalistic standards of accuracy differs from public relations standards. Spokespersons, PR, recognize the norms of accuracy, but to an extent that depends on the interest of their client, which means that their understanding of accuracy is shaped by two intentions: to serve the need to inform the public with trustful information, but not all the time, and at the same time, the interest of the client should also be taken into account, which is why spokespersons often spread selective truth. Is it possible in journalism to do that? No. In this context, it can be argued that others perform journalistic work, but are not focused on journalistic goals. That's why fool with a microphone in the hand is not a journalist, or it can be journalist without any kind of competence. In this context, why? Because he is not focused on the journalistic goals, but instead strive to satisfy their own special interests and needs. Citizenship journalism, what is that? So this one, the previous, only once again confirms the fact that in the practice of market journalism, at all stages of communication process, the withdrawals of journalists can be evident, while his role is assumed by the owners of capital and the holders of political power and authority, controlling instead of the journalist the communication process itself. At the same time, when considering the crisis of ethics in journalism, one must not bypass other very important factor, which in the postmodern approach to morality often is associated with the death of the ethical. Namely, ethics in the light of the postmodern relativism is understood as something that is destined for the trash of the history, as an illusion that the postmodern journalist should not know how to live without it, because he or she no longer need it. According to that view, according to the view that it is the opposite of tolerance and reaching on freedom, which is not in accordance with the postmodern principle. So the journalist, in the spirit of postmodernism, rejects firmly established norms because he considers that all principles are a matter of current understanding, current situations and interpretations. Thus the code, ethical code for journalists, as a record of the journalistic norms, becomes unnecessary thing and brings indecision and contradictions. Hence the traditional ethical discourse is becoming irrelevant and something that can hinder journalists in doing what they do. And problems do not have predetermined solution. There are no hard and fast principles that can be learned, remembered, and developed. Human reality is a messy one, so moral decisions, unlike abstract ethical principles, are contradictory. This usually says Zygmunt Bauman, the father of the postmodern, or the main speaker of the postmodern ideas. With that, journalism in the postmodern period loses the illusion that the written norms in the codes are achievable, because the small system that we create is not strong enough. They are fragile, different, so the journalist rightly re-announces the code and ethically evaluates according to the feelings. I think according to my feeling, it is my opinion. Who are you? Which means intuitive, emotional, and often irrational, which could be labeled as ethical nihilism. The postmodern attitude says that everything is changeable. That is, norms are replaced by ethical relativism as a point of view that says that what is good or bad, right or wrong, is relative. So the starting point of relativistically oriented journalists is that the only ethics of this profession is the one that everyone sets for himself. My personal ethics can be ethics. Okay, it is personal, but can be ethics. Analyzed to the end, because in the postmodern, only indeterminacy is important, that in no area should there be a privileged group that would determine the action. This point of view means the end of the efforts of professionalizing journalism and leads to a state without standards and rules. Precisely because of this absence of the absolute, everything becomes acceptable and equal good in journalism, checking and no checking of the information, respecting privacy or no respecting privacy. It doesn't matter, there are paparazzi, they will bring me some photos, but it is not ethical. It doesn't matter if it is or it isn't. You have Monica Bellucci on the pictures and that will sold out very quickly. Respecting privacy, no respecting privacy, entering into the privacy depending on the situation, the circumstances, and the persons that are involved in the process. However, journalists who work unethically and refer to the relativism often misunderstand as a support, philosophical support, all of this, of the approach that a possessed intrusion into others people's affair. In essence, it is a degraded variant of ethical relativism, which assures that everything is relative, but if its principles are examined in more detail, it can be argued that it does not mean a complete denial of all rules. That is, it does not mean that everything is allowed. That is the way its conspirators often interpret it in everyday use. Quite opposite. It requires a reasoned consideration whether it is really a situation in which an exception to that rule is allowed. So the postmodern crisis of the subject in journalism is shown to be the downfall of the ideology of the autonomous journalist, which is based on the new century belief in the possibilities of getting to know the world, the sovereign disposal of the truth, the rational distribution of values and freedom. This is what is called the period of high modernism of American journalism, Wild, Wild West, when the role of the journalist seems rationalized, when it seems possible for the journalist to be independent, impartial, truthworthy, morally one who embodies social rationally according to the principle of one reason, one truth, one objectivity. That is, the analytic reason should enable him to arrive to the point of verified so-called truth, as well as their objective mediation to the audience. Is it possible? No. But there it is in the practice. So this postmodern period, as a fundamental civilization turn, that turns a different views of the journalist as a subject, where the key is the knowledge that the production of news is influenced by various structures that condition the reason: bias, stereotypes, desires, drive, unconscious, irrational will, the structure of language, feeling, values, ideas, and others. The crisis of the modern age brings the realization that no one can be a sovereign modern subject, and hence the journalist, who, like any other person, he or she is always a final and limited being. With that, the postmodern journalist loses authenticity in relation with others who are not respected, who are not special people as persons, but as subjects of everyday life. Martin Heidegger calls se, das man. I pronounced it good, I think. And whose characteristic is mediocrity. Mediocritezia. With that, the journalist is subordinated to them as if to some special forces that takes away his subjectivity and makes him inauthentical as a repeater of how to work, how to do, how to write, as a transmitter of what has been said. Try to put additional efforts in this meta reviewing of the same process, only for one paragraph. Here, style and ethics no longer rule, but fashion and etiquette. For example, a journalist writes about the accused one as guilty because there is that is how it is done. Everybody are doing so, on that manner. The argument that everyone does so points to the loss of the subject that is included in everyone, and everyone is exactly nobody. He is a servant of the opinion, speech, behavior, and actions of the others, and does not act for his own reason at all, but rather he is directed toward the other as the average of the average. Prosek not prosecut. In everyday life, we usually speak the way it is spoken. And what is spoken about is transmitted with the help of the rumors, whereby rumors are speech, but unauthentical speech. Gossip is spread on the basis of the rumors, which is characterized by overtaking one's own words, that they do not talk about things but about themselves. They are words about words, reporting not about the other's experience, but about the others are talking about it. That is the main difference. I'm on the last page. So, to cut a little bit this good story, I'm on the last page. I didn't intend to speak all of this, but the postmodern journalist, how can be a moral subject or to become again as a moral subject? Just to conclude. Yeah. Just to find the last one. This is the last one. Considering that personal fulfillment is the highest goal that a person can set for himself in that pyramid of values, hierarchy of values, the individual must introduce an order that will bring the indecision and the divergence between morality and action. In the case of journalists, like any person, should have self-respect and the sense of satisfaction that will follow the action that he believes is right. For his life to have a meaning, he needs a sense of personal dignity, integrity, and a good opinion of himself. It can be achieved only if one advocates for correct behavior. As Merrill states, what people report on and how they do it, that's what they are. Through their actions, they create their ethical entity, in other words, their essence. What the journalist report is an expression of himself and the meaning of determining himself as a person and as a journalist. The great good for a journalist as a journalist is the same as the greatest good for a journalist as a human being, the development of authenticity, that is the first thing, understood as the determination of human particularity of his self in terms of what man does, as well as his willingness to take responsibility. Understanding ethics as first of all personal and then professional ethics does not mean that the individual determines what is good and what is not. On the contrary, his behavior is determined as a person, meaning a person is ethical only to the extent that he is ready to accept the responsibility. And to summarize in one sentence, ethics in journalism can save who? Only its barrier. The one who should be ethical, that is responsible, and that is the journalist. But first of all, it's not about saving journalism. He must save himself, or at least to face with the loss of his subjectivity as well as to overcome his unauthenticity. I think that is the right, correct, maybe not true, but for me, as my opinion, it is worth and trustful path to achieving the goal of coming back of the journalist as the subject of his own profession. Thank you. If I was too long and...
7 minutes we have another lecture.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to skip the question and answers.
Okay, we can discuss outside.
Yeah,
It's
we
not-
can discuss over the cup of coffee. So thank you
Yeah.
very much.
A chtěla jsem tu vlastně přednášku zahájit jinak a zahájím ji přesně, protože jsem si uvědomila jednu věc. Novinář, jakým jsem já, vy víte, jakým jsem novinářem, 25letou praxí jsem prošla. Novinář by za každou cenu měl říkat pravdu, fakta a nebát se obnažit i svou intimitu, své nitro, svoji osobní rovinu. Anglicky umím velmi špatně. Jsem dítě narozené v totalitě a jsem vždycky byla velmi zaměstnaná žena a neupřednostnila jsem výuku jazyků a kariéru jsem si vybudovala, ale jazyky jsem se zapomněla učit. Neříkám, že neumím anglicky a německy. Umím, ale ne tak dobře, abych tady se před vámi nestrapňovala, protože doufám, že vy umíte lépe. Teď jsem vám ukázala takovou tu intimní stránku novináře. Novinář si za každou cenu má držet od svých informací, svých respondentů odstup. Novinář by měl mít takovou chladnou stránku a tvář jakože mě se to netýká, po mně všechno steče. Když jsme se kdysi Kuby Železného, a je to tak 8 let, ptali, jak je to s ním, když on referuje o něčem nebo dělá rozhovor s někým, kdo mu příliš nevoní, kdo prostě mu vadí, a říkám záměrně Jakub Železný, tak řekl, a to jsem i říkal na přednáškách svým studentům, tak řekl, víte, já mám takovou poučku. Já si vždycky řeknu, mně je to jedno. Mně je to jedno, co si o tom myslíte. Mám k vám distanc. Ale co se stalo? Kdo znáte Jakuba Železného a občas ho vidíte na nějaké televizní obrazovce, tak si uvědomte, že má na sobě velmi slušivý oblek a na té klopě má 2 odznaky. Každou událost, kterou uvádí, každé události, které uvádí, tam má ty 2 odznaky. Co tím dává najevo? Že už mu něco tak jedno není. A to je vlastně předmětem této přednášky a proto jsem to zahájila tak, jak jsem to zahájila. Přiznáním o té intimitě novináře, který se tváří, že je mu za všechno vlastně jedno, přiznáním slabých míst novináře, nedostatečnosti novináře, i to vlastně, jaké nároky jsou na novinářské řemeslo kladeny. Jste mi studenti, tak vám nebudu říkat, co obnáší práce zpravodaje. Já říkám novinář, ale mám okamžitě říct zpravodaj. Člověk, který je u prvotního příjmu informací. Ten novinář zpravodaj je ten, který dostává tu nejzásadnější nálož. Protože on už to posílá dál třeba editorům, moderátorům, zprávařům. Proto ten výzkum, který teď vedu a do kterého jsem se pustila, se týká především zpravodajů. Novinář samozřejmě není jenom zpravodaj. Novinář může být redaktor, zprávař, moderátor, komentátor, ale já mluvím o zpravodajství. A tato přednáška se týká zpravodajů, lidí, kteří jsou u prvotního zdroje informací. Novináři se pořád musí ptát, ověřovat, říkat pravdu. A vlastně novinář, zpravodaj, tím, jak se rozhodne jít touhle poutí, přijímá povinnosti a stává se jeho profese jeho životním stylem, který ovlivňuje nejenom jeho osobní život, ale když má rodinu, tak i jeho rodinu. Zahraniční zpravodaj mnohdy má rodinu a děti. Uvědomili jste si někdy, že zahraniční zpravodaj třeba v Českém rozhlase, když zvedne kotvy na 5 let, tak nezvedne kotvy jenom sám za sebe. Zvedne kotvy se svým partnerem či partnerkou a oni mají třeba děti, nebo během toho pobytu v zahraničí, toho 5letého pobytu se mu narodí dítě a musí chodit do tamních škol. Takže s ním putuje jeho rodina světem. Kaliba, kolega v Americe, Jan Kaliba, je teď v Americe a stěhují se z místa na místo. Mají 2 nebo 3 děti. Takovým korábem té novinářské zpravodajské pouště je Martin Dorazín, o kterém my ani nevíme, jestli má osobní život a jestli má rodinu. A to si pište, že ji má. Akorát o ní veřejně nemluví. Proč? No, protože se oni třeba i bojí. Jsme u další roviny novinářského řemesla. To jsou zase zpravodajové. Takže tady dokládám to, že novinář, zpravodaj, životní styl, životní názor, životní nadhled, životní poznání. Co se o novinářích říká? Jsou hlídacími psy demokracie. Musí být nestranní, neutrální, vyvážení. Musí být nezávislí. A zároveň musí být strašně rychlí, pohotoví a okamžitě teď hned přinést dobrou informaci a umět ji rozpoznat. Uvědomujete si, kolik nálože je na obyčejného člověka nakládáno? A další věc, uvědomujete si na sociálních sítích, jak se o novinářích, kteří se jenom ptají a touží po své odpovědi, jak se o nich mluví? Jak se mluví o Lence Kabrhelové, Veronice Sedláčkové, Marii Bastlové? Všimli jste si na sociálních sítích, jaké dostávají nálože, dardy a neuráží se jenom oni, tyto dámy nebo ti pánové, ale celé jejich rodiny. Uvědomujete si, kolik třeba novinářů muselo být z nějaké pozice staženo a třeba ukryto? Teď si promítněte, kolik novinářů bylo za posledních 5 let zavražděno. A přesto musíme mít hlubokou etiku, přesto musíme pořád se ptát a nebýt třeba úplatní. My jsme s docentem Motalem před 2 lety, tedy ve vrcholné chvíli pandemie, přistoupili na to, že začneme zkoumat, jaká jsou morální a etická dilemata novináře, který je zároveň věřícím člověkem. Já vám tady budu pouštět slajdy a povídat, ale budu vám povídat z patra, protože data si můžete přečíst. A budu zase obnažovat pravdu. A když mi docent Motal nabídl toto téma, tak jsem se na to dívala s velkým despektem, protože i v sobě jsem měla zakódováno, že přece věřící novinář v branži dělá jenom témata, která se týkají církevních náboženských témat. Že přece novinář nemůže být zároveň katolík, evangelík, praktikující jehovista. Jde to dohromady? Asi jo, protože když jsem ten výzkum dělala, tak jsem se rozhodla lovit ve svých řadách. Nikdo z novinářů vás k sobě nepustí blízko. Využila jsem toho, že jsem letitá novinářka a že spoustu lidí mi možná i trochu důvěřuje, tak to byste koukali, jak lehce jsem mohla ve svém okolí najít novináře, kteří jsou tvrdě věřícími zpravodaji. A když jsem několikrát se ocitla v kostele třeba na biřmování své dcery, nebo při jiných příležitostech, ku podivu jsem tam potkala novinářku, do které bych absolutně neřekla, že se nechá biřmovat. Ona nebyla ráda, že ji vidím. Stála vedle mé dcery. Nikdy jsme se o tom my 2 nebavili, byť má kancelář asi tak 4 dveře ode mě. Zvláštní, že? To je ono, to je ta nuance. My o svých intimitách vlastně nemluvíme ani před sebou. Přesto jsem 2 rozhovory udělala a záměrně jsme šli cestou hloubkového narrativního rozhovoru a zvolili jsme osobnosti, která jedna je na začátku své kariéry, jsou to praktikující katolíci. Byli to praktikující katolíci a to ne tak, že řekli jednou za 14 dní jdu do kostela. Byli to katolíci, kteří dodržují náležitosti. Jedna osoba, začátek kariéry, muž nebo žena. Druhá osoba, finále, dejme tomu vrchol své kariéry, muž nebo žena. Takže žena, muž, začátek, konec. A samozřejmě přiznání barvy, že jsem letitou reportérkou, která vlastně ke katolické víře nemá až tak daleko. Takže můžu být považována za třetího respondenta v tomto výzkumu. Už jste četli, jaké byly naše výsledky. Oni byli přesvědčeni, že víra je neovlivňuje. Přesto to v nich je. Jak mohou být oni neangažovaní, když něčemu věříte hluboce, tak vám to přece vjede pod kůži a stává se to vaším životním stylem, podobně jako ta novinařina. Najednou je víra a novinářská profese asi jedno. Najednou jsme v nějaké dimenzi angažovanosti. Mně trošku chybí, že nemůžete odpovídat. A kdybyste se chtěli něco zeptat, se zeptejte. Já nevím, jestli mi rozumíte. Jde oddělit veřejný zájem novinářské služby a jde oddělit intimní soukromý život? Jde to? Já jsem si dřív myslela, že ano, byla jsem o tom přesvědčená a nikdy jsem se nad tím nijak hluboce nezamýšlela. Poslední 2-3 roky, a možná za to může i výzkum s docentem Motalem, možná za to můžou i přednášky s vámi, možná za to může válečné a pandemické zpravodajství, poslední dobou svůj názor přehodnocuji. Novinář, když se ho zeptáte, tak vám řekne, jsem nevěřící, jsem skeptik. Novináři... No jak to? Jako ateista taky jsou věřící? Oni s tomu novináři jsou specifická kategorie, kteří se rádi vysmívají tímhle věcem, těmhle velkým slovům. Kdybych vás pustila mezi smečku zpravodajů, tak už můžu citovat svoji kolegyni kamarádku, která řekne, ty fakt věříš, že tam nějaký košilatý pápr dají na obláčku? Říkám, vůbec ne. S tímhle na mě vůbec nechoď, to mě nezajímá. Cuk, cuk, cuk. Ale intimitu neřeknou.
Ona věří, že to není.
To je diskuze, že jo? Ale ona se hlásí nebo nehlásí se k nějaké církvi. Já jsem zpovídala lidi, kteří se hlásí k nějaké církvi, jo? A jdou do toho kostela, jdou se mu pomodlit, dodržují pravidla té církve. Jo? Takhle. Taky mluvím o novinářích média veřejné služby záměrně, protože to médium veřejné služby, jak už jsme několikrát řekli, to je právě to plnění veřejného zájmu, toho poslání. Sloužím lidu, sloužím veřejnosti a neměl bych být ovlivněn žádnými zájmy. Tak, ta otázka zněla, dokážeme skutečně od sebe oddělit osobní názor, osobní postoj od toho, že máme být v uvozovkách, jak nás učili a stále se to na fakultách učí, objektivní, vyvážení, nestranní a mít pozici je mi to jedno? Touhle školou jsem prošla také. Školou je mi to úplně jedno. Já jsem se ráda schovala za sklo objektivity, protože to vyvolává bezpečí a jistotu. Když novinář vyleze ze své komfortní zóny, jde z kůží na trh, tak ho ještě víc ostřelujou, jako myšlenkově, urážkama. Proto jsem mluvila o Bastlové, Sedláčkové, Kabrhelové. Ale ne všichni novináři mají odvahu třeba mít vlaječky na klopě. To znamená, že většina novinářů zpravodajů se stále ještě ráda schová za sklo, kde je napsáno objektivní, nestranná, jsem služba lidu, můj názor vás nesmí zajímat. Otázka, co bude dál, protože si myslím, že to není udržitelné. Zatím to je tak, podle těch kódů, které jsme udělali s Alžbětou a co tam bylo to druhé jméno, Alžběta a... Jak? Děkuju. Tak to vypadalo tak, když jsme dělali takovou my jsme dělali strukturovaný, kódovaný rozhovor, ten trval asi s každým 50 minut a ptali jsme se na jedny otázky a nechali jsme ho povídat. A potom jsme to pomocí otevřeného kódování vlastně kódovali, co z toho vylízá. Takže klasická vědecká výzkumná metoda. A vznikla mi taková teorie, kterou já teď trošku banálně přinesu. Já, věřící novinář, před vstupem do Českého rozhlasu, média veřejné služby, pomyslně nasazuji kabát. Poctivě si ho zapínám, předtím si ten kabát pořádně prohlédnu, jestli nemá díry, jestli nemá někde natržené švy, jestli je třeba moderní, jestli je teplý, jestli bude slušet. Přijmu tím kabátem, který si nasadím, identitu toho média veřejné služby a nesu ho s hrdostí, protože se proto rozhodnu. Co se ale stane, když z toho kabátu vyrostu? Co se ale stane, když zjistím, že ten kabát je šitý horkou nití a rozpáří se třeba tady pod ramenem? Jako novinář, věřící, ale i třeba, nebo katolický novinář, ho bezostyšně svléknu a vyjevím svou pravou tvář. A to nám ty kódy potvrdily, byť, když jsme začínali, a byla tam otázka na ty respondenty, jestli tahají svoji víru do práce, tak to razantně popřeli. Přesto nám vylezlo, že ve chvíli ten kabát jim nesedí a mají etický spor, to sundají, zabejčí se a nehnou se. Tady to dokonce někde, tady je entertainment, jo? Tady je to dokonce citováno, jestli jsem to už ten slide projela, tak tady jsme to i dokonce citovali někde, že řekl, že se prostě zabejčím a nejdu dál. Jak se to bude dál ubírat? Vracím se znovu k tomu úvodu, kdy jsem řekla, že abychom překonali současnou krizi novinařiny, zpravodajství, tak pojďme se bavit otevřeně o tom, že novinář už nemusí být jenom neangažovaným, nestranným člověkem, ale může si dovolit za určitých okolností, třeba jako Jana Peroutková, začít plakat, když vidí reportáž z matky, které zemřelo dítě vinou náletu na Ukrajinu. Byly diskuze. Měla právo Peroutková, moderátorka událostí, proškolená, tu reportáž musela předtím vidět, než jdete na plac, slyšíte každou věc, kterou vám tam pustí, jste připravená, píšete si spojáky. Nepochybuju o tom, že ta moderátorka ty spojáky i ty obrazy viděla. Přesto se rozplakala. Bylo to divadlo? Měla na to právo? Já si myslím, že měla. Dřív bych řekla, že ne. Jo. Musí. Novinář, zpravodaj je školen na to, že musí. Ale představte si, že se z tohohle stane móda a začnou to novináři zneužívat a začnou ještě víc ukazovat, že mají právo být angažovaní a osobní a začnou stejně jako lidi a komentátoři na sociálních sítích říkat své názory a postoje. A víte, že jsme v rovině zpravodajství. Kam to může dojít? Velká otázka. Ale pokud se nezačneme o tom bavit, kde ta hranice je, tak budeme pořád v krizi. Novinařina, žurnalistika v Česku je v krizi. Proč asi? Novináři se do roku 90 striktně učili o tom nestrannosti, objektivitě. Po roce 90 se ukázalo, že nastoupil duální systém, takže priváty. Ale nejenom priváty a médium veřejné služby, ale priváty začaly zakládat strašně moc rádií, televizních stanic, vzniklo spoustu dalších tištěných platform. A do toho po 95. vstoupila bezbřehost internetu, která začala být dostupná skoro všem. Vzpomeňte si na heslo, nebo vaše rodiče znali heslo, dostupný internet do každé rodiny. Takže najednou těm informacím se mohli dostávat všichni lidé. A teď novinář pořád měl zůstávat stejný a novinářská oblast taky pořád stejná. Já tu nejsem proto, abych dávala odpovědi. Já jsem tady přišla proto, abych vlastně ty odpovědi položila a doufala, že vy na této katedře je budete klást také a budete hledat odpověď. Nevím, jestli jsem už nevyčerpala svůj časový přísun. A tím bych uzavřela. Ještě 5 minut. Tak a to je právě to. Já si myslím, že teď jsem hodila míč. Na vás. Přemýšlejte o tom. Přemýšleli jste vůbec o tom? Diskuze.
Paní Veteško, já dobře pamatuju, jaké jsme měli diskuze před rokem a máte natolik velkou zkušenost, že já moc obdivuju tomu, jak jste dokázala změnit svůj názor. A moc toho vážím prostě.
Proto jsem začínala tím přiznáním, jakým jsem začínala, o té angličtině. Proto jsem začínala tím přiznáním, jakým jsem začínala, o té angličtině.
Jo, já jsem tak pochopila z té vaší prezentace, že jste měli nějakou krizi prostě během začátku té války a moc jako vážím, že jste dokázala tak změnit názor a uvidět věci jako nějak z jiného pohledu.
V současné době provádím další výzkum na téma pandemické a válečné zpravodajství a dopad na psychiku žen zpravodajek. Myslela jsem si, jsem ve fázi výzkumu, takže ta data nejsou ještě relevantní. Jsem ve fázi výzkumu, kdy jsem překvapena, že je jedno, jestli to je chlap nebo ženská. Že postupují úplně stejně. Přijmu informaci, vůbec nevnímám obsah a vůbec o tom nepřemýšlím. Jedu jako robot, tady v Buči, hroby, děti, jo, tady, tam v tom městě, bomby, urvané ruce, nohy, 15 dětí ze školky mrtvých. Šup, 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 dostanu to do vysílání. Takhle oni fungují. To je minuta, je to ve vysílání a potom jdou a brečí. Ale až potom. Dobře, možná dobrý postup. Co se s tou ženou nebo mužem stane za týden, za 2 týdny? Vemte si, že pandemie trvala 2 roky. Tam jsme mluvili o lidech, kteří umírali a byli našimi blízkými. Byla jsem u toho, že jsme vysílali reportáž z mého města a vím přesně, kdo a která rodina přišla a vysílali jsme to. A byla jsem u toho. Přišla o své blízké. Neoddechli jsme si a přišla válečné zpravodajství a vysíláme, co vysíláme. Tak.
Děkuji za vaši práci.
A už to vypněte to, nestreamujte. Jo, zastavte to.
Tak vydržte jenom chvilku. Já to tady zruším. A otevřu něco jiného. Tak a vidíte, že už jenom nápis je hodně jinde od Míši. Já jsem nikdy nebyla žurnalista, nikdy jsem nebyla zpravodaj. Vždycky jsem ten člověk, který je vlastně schovaný za něčím. Nikdy mě není vidět, nikdy mě není slyšet a přesto jsem celý život byla v praxi. A zajímavé je, že i tady v tom, co vám teďka ukážu, půjdeme do toho, co je schované za. A i když jsem člověk obrazový a celý život jsem řešila obraz, tak tentokrát se podíváme, co je skryté v textu. Co se skrývá v textu a na první pohled to není vidět a ono, když se s tím pracuje nějakým výzkumným způsobem, tak vylezou zajímavá data, která některá z nich dneska uslyšíte jako auditorium úplně poprvé, protože ten výzkum, co vám řeknu úplně na konci, ten ještě není zveřejněný, takže se to nahrává, to potom budeme muset odmazat ten konec. Protože jste tady teda auditorium, které uslyší něco, co není zveřejněné, to by se teoreticky nemělo zveřejňovat, pokud takhle mezi lidi, abyste náhodou někdo z vás mi to neukradl potom. Tak a o čem to bude? My všichni víme, že digitální doba, kterou prožíváme, nám hodně mění životy. A mě ta otázka toho, jak moc to ty naše životy mění, tak mě zajímá z toho vnitřního řádu, co se mění v nás. Viděli jsme teď u přednášky u Míši Veteškové, že i ona se proměnila za poslední roky, mohlo to být spoustu vlivů. Mluvilo se tady o krizi, o různých krizích, které na člověka mají nějaký vliv. Možná krize není tak úplně špatná věc, když na nás má vliv, že vlastně zvnitřňujeme ten svůj postoj k různým věcem. Tady na té fotce vidíte, když nastupoval Benedikt XVI. Na svatopetrském náměstí, tak to vypadalo takhle. A když o pár let později, ta stejná chvíle, svatopetrské náměstí při nástupu Františka, papeže Františka, vypadalo takhle. Tady toto je od sebe 8 let. Za těch 8 let nastoupily všechny sociální sítě, začal se používat iPhone, stalo se hodně věcí. 8 let nám změnilo úplně pohled na své okolí. A těch 8 let, tady tahle velká změna těch 2 fotografií, to začalo o něco dřív, takže ta moje krátká přednáška se bude odvíjet ze 3 částí. Jedna historie, začneme v roce 95, nebojte, dostaneme se do 13. století, ale jenom chvilku. A skončíme dneska. Co se stalo v roce 95? Internet už existoval, ale dostal se do světa, mezi lidí. V 95. roce začaly organizace promovat svoje myšlenky na internetu, takže se k tomu dostali první tisíce, potom 100 000 a postupně miliony lidí. A my se podíváme do Vatikánu, kde v roce 95 tady sestra Judith Zebelein spustila internetové stránky Vatikánu. Stala se taková věc, úplně náhodou, nikdo to nemohl organizovat. Ona to připravovala rok ty stránky, rozhodli se, že je spustí po Vánocích v 95. roce a že aby to mělo hned nějaký dosah, takže tam dají projev Jana Pavla II., který říká 1. ledna Urbi et Orbi, možná někdo znáte, vždycky na Nový rok. To znamená vlastně stránky existovaly někde poslední den 95. roku a od 1.1.96 byly oficiálně zveřejněné, bylo tam v několika jazycích, tam byl uvedený ten projev a čekalo se, co bude. A co bylo? Jan Pavel II. Vystoupil, byl nemocný a začal projev. A bylo mu tak zle, že musel z toho projevu odejít, na chvilku si odpočinout. Se svými poradci se poradil, co má dělat, že je mu zle, že není schopný mluvit. A oni mu poradili, ať jenom požehná a odejde. Tak. On odešel a na ty stránky přišlo 300 000 lidí během 2 dnů. To tehdy bylo neuvěřitelné číslo. Tedy chodili na běžné stránky organizací i států třeba maximálně 1000 lidí. A tady všichni byli zvědaví a chtěli si přečíst, co teda v tom Urbi et Orbi bylo, a místo toho, aby se dívali na televizi, tak šli na internet. A co se stalo? Spálili serverovnu Vatikánu. Nikdo s tím nepočítal. Ta sestra Zebelein taky trvala na tom, že na těch stránkách musí být e-mail, aby lidi mohli psát do Vatikánu. Vy jste si tam možná předtím přečetli, že biskup se ptal pošty, co by řekli na to, kdyby měli mailovou adresu. Oni řekli, musíme o tom popřemýšlet. Nikdo nevěřil, že mail k něčemu vůbec může být, že to může být užitečná věc. Během prvního dne tam přišly stovky mailů. Samozřejmě ve Vatikánu nebyla žádná kancelář, kde by byl někdo pro to, aby ty maily vyřizoval. No a co se stalo pak? Spálili se teda servery a ten tým, vlastně v podstatě 3 lidí, který organizoval v tehdejší době internet, se rozhodl, že ty stránky stáhne. Dnes je oficiální názor, že stránky byly udělané jako pokus. Ale nebyly. Já jsem četla tehdejší noviny, vlastně CNN, BBC, ještě v lednu, ještě týden potom, co to stáhli, ty stránky, tak psali o tom, že existují stránky Vatikánu. Oni to stáhli, protože zjistili, že je to taková síla, co se proti ním valí, že to nejsou schopni vůbec naorganizovat. K dnešnímu dní je to ta organizace, která má na starost média ve Vatikánu, jmenuje se Dikasterium pro média, tak má největší rozpočet ze všech dikastérií ve Vatikánu. Tehdy to asi bylo podstatně jinak. Takhle podobně vypadaly ty stránky. Když se podíváte, tak vidíte tam už rok 2000. Já jsem prostě nenašla na internetu, v žádných archivech nejsou starší stránky než z roku 2000, ale přibližně takhle vypadaly první stránky Vatikánu. Ta barva a ten rastr, co tam vidíte, to vybrala ta sestra a možná z nějaké úcty k ní, protože ona fakt byla ta síla, co to tam rozjela, i když se to třeba úplně tak nepovedlo, jak si představovala, anebo se to právě naopak povedlo mnohem líp, než jak si představovala, tak ta barva a ten rastr vlastně na těch stránkách je dodnes. I když jsou zmodernizované, už vypadají jinak, možná někdo si můžete podívat, jak vypadá dneska Vatikán 2, tak uvidíte, že to podstatně zmodernizovali, ale barva zůstává stejná. Tak a to jenom pro zajímavost je zpráva, ten banner barevný nahoře tam nebyl, jo, ale takhle vypadala zpráva o tom, co se stalo na CNN. I s fotkama, prosím. Jo. Takže tady popisují to, že vlastně papež, myslím snad poprvé v historii toho projevu, od té doby, co byl, tak musel odstoupit a říct, že prostě nemůže dál. Tak a stránky se teda vyply a zaply se skoro za 1,5 roku. 1,5 roku trvalo, než Vatikán vás spustil znovu svoje stránky, mezitím samozřejmě všechny velké, menší organizace už ty stránky spouštěly a internet se rozjel. V 97. roce už jsme měli my s Míšou internet taky. Vy jste se ještě nenarodili, ale my jsme už ho používali.
I mobily jsme měli. Já 96.
Jo, protože Míša je žurnalista, že jo, takže ona měla mobil. A já jsem natáčela filmy a vím, že jsme měli takový mobil, který se nosil v tašce. Jo, jako produkční měla mobil v takový velký, vážil asi ty 5 kilo a baterka vydržela asi tak 20 minut, ale produkční slavnostně měla mobil. Hovor stál minuta, v tehdejší době samozřejmě to byly jiné peníze, hovor stál třeba 20 korun minuta. Jo, a to tehdy bylo hodně. Jo. Chleba stál 10 korun. Jo, a 20 korun minuta hovoru. Takže to je začátek historie internetu. A teď se podívejme dál. Co se stalo mezi tou dobou, co Vatikán vypnul a zapnul svůj internet. To je takový bombonek, jenom abyste viděli, jak internet si nacházel úplně nová řečiště, které do té doby vůbec nikdo nemohl ani postřehnout, že budou, že to myšlení najednou se začalo obrovsky měnit. Já jsem tady dala mapu Alžíra, takže si říkáte Alžíru, takže si říkáte, tak jsme trošku daleko od Vatikánu. To je poušť, v které do 5. století bylo biskupství. V 5. století to biskupství zavál písek a od té doby nikdo neví, kde bylo. No. To biskupství se jmenuje Parténie, dodnes oficiálně to biskupství je ve Vatikánu zapsané na papíře, ale nikdo neví, kde je. Na žádné mapě už se nedochovalo. Někde tady přesně, to jsem si teda našla přesně, že je to blízko u toho města a že tím pískem zavátá krajina, kde nikdo nebydlí, ani jeden člověk, je tam poušť, tak to je dodnes vedené jako biskupství. Proč vám to říkám? Protože s tím biskupstvím byl spojený tenhle muž, Jacques Gillot, to je biskup francouzský. A on byl trošku nepohodlný, protože prosazoval spoustu věcí, které se oficiálně v církvi nenosily a dodnes nenosí. Ponechme stranou, co to všechno bylo, můžete si to vygooglit. A protože byl nepohodlný, tak vlastně z Vatikánu mu přišlo nařízení, že pokud tu nepohodlnost trošku nespraví, takže bude biskupem Parténie v Alžíru. A tenhle biskup udělal co? Řekl jo, já do toho jdu. Já budu biskupem Parténie. A vytvořil své webové stránky. Parténie bez hranic. A tyto stránky měly skoro stejnou návštěvnost jako ty původní vatikánské stránky. Si vždycky říkám, to museli jít do Vatikánu dost naštvaní teda. Ale tohle se dělo. To je prostě řečiště toho neznámého, ten neznámé a obrovské síly, která nás tady zaplavila a kterou nikdo nevěděl, kudy ma poteče, co se bude dít. Člověk jenom zůstal stát a viděl, jak se třeba topí, nebo jak mu to ničí jeho domečky z karet, jeho představy, jeho plány. Internet je síla, která se přirovnává dneska ke knihtisku, který taky ze začátku mnozí představitelé církve se snažili vlastně koordinovat, zakazovat. Nicméně dneska víme, že nejčastěji tištěná kniha na světě prozatím je pořád Bible. Tak a my se podíváme na práci teda 3 starších pánů, kteří se nachomítli k tomu, že tahle obrovská síla jménem internet nám tady do naší civilizace přistála v plné síle. Jan Pavel II., Benedikt XVI. A František. Každý s tou informací, že internet asi bude něco znamenat v komunikaci s komunitou křesťanskou i s komunitou obecně, tak každý s ní pracoval nějak jinak. Podívejme se v rychlosti na ně. Vybrala jsem fotku Jana Pavla II. Tady ze svatého Kopečka. Po jeho straně je Jan Graubner, si ho poznáte. Po druhé straně mám ten dojem, že je to Michal Unlaum, který tady dneska učí na teologické fakultě, vypadá dost jinak. A Jan Pavel II. Samozřejmě zažil tenhle začátek internetu. To, že byl třeba internet rok a něco vyplý, to prý se mu úplně nelíbilo, dokonce podporoval rychlý znovu nástup internetu. O internetu psal ve svých textech. Nicméně počítač nepoužíval vůbec, psal plnícím perem. A jeho pravidlo bylo, že co není v televizi, to jakoby neexistovalo. Takže on tehdy, když jste viděli ty stránky, které byly jenom textové, nedal se tam dát moc obrázku, viděli jste, že i CNN tam dává malinké fotky, protože vědělo, že to ty počítače nebudou umět načíst nějakou velkou fotku přes celý formát. Že lidi, aby se k tomu textu dostali, tak tam můžou být jenom malinké obrázky, aby se jim to načetlo celé. Tak Jan Pavel II. Plně podporoval televizi a když vlastně zjistil, že existuje satelitní televize, která roznese jeho myšlenky do celého světa, tak to bylo to, co ho fascinovalo se začátkem internetu. Internet pro něho neznamenal tolik, co pro jeho nástupce. A vy si říkáte Benedikt XVI., tak ten určitě v jeho 75 letech, zhruba plus minus, když byl na papežském stolci, tak ten určitě byl nadšený příznivce internetu. Co myslíte? Byl. S internetem pracovat neuměl, což si za chvilku ukážeme na malé ukázce, ale jeho texty, které napsal, tak vlastně byly z těchto 3 papežů nejvíc blízko tomu, že propagoval internet jako mocný nástroj pro dobré věci. Že s internetem se dá udělat obrovské dobro. Takže taková možná představa, že třeba církevní představitelé byli velmi pasivní k internetu, tak rozhodně od hlavy nikdy nešla. Tady v tomto období. A odborníci na tu dobu, jak se prolíná křesťanství s internetem, nazývají Benedikta XVI. Tweetového papeže, protože spustil první tweet. No a na to konto já jsem teda neodolala a připravila jsem si pro vás, na YouTube existuje záznam toho, jak se ten tweet spouštěl. On má původní zvuk z té místnosti, bylo to v místnosti, kde podává papež audienci v Římě a udělali teda velké gesto, že sezvali spoustu novinářů, hostů, posadili Benedikta ke stolu, u něho z jedné strany stojí 2 pěkné ženy, z druhé strany velká kamera a fotoaparát, aby to mohli zaznamenat, ten historický okamžik. A my se na to podíváme. Jestli to spustíme. Nespustíme. Tak to mě mrzí. Mělo by to být video, ale není. Nespustíme. Ale podívejte se na to na YouTube. Když najdete v angličtině, si zadejte Benedikt XVI. Startuje první tweet, tak to najdete. Já vám to jenom vkratce popíšu. Nikoho nenapadlo, že Benedikt XVI. Nebude umět ťuknout na tablet. Takže všechno bylo krásně připravené, nádherně, obrovská kamera, obrovský foťák. Připravili mu tablet, on si k tomu sedl, s úsměvem se na to díval, teď mu tam odborník na Twitter poradil, že tady na to, že je to všechno připravené, co tam chtěl napsat, a že tady na to místo má kliknout. A on na to klikl a nic. Ale sranda je ta, že v tu dobu, jak na to klikl, tak celý ten sál obrovský začal tleskat. Protože nikdo neviděl, co se děje na tom stole. On prostě udělal takové jako velké gesto, udělal klik, tou svojí jemnou akademickou rukou, že protože byl velký akademik, tak udělal klik, celý sál začal tleskat a pán, který měl na starosti, to nenápadně k němu přistoupil a udělal ťuk. A tweet se odeslal. On prostě nevím, dneska už si říkáme, jak je to možné, že někdo neumí kliknout. Mu to nešlo. Nicméně právě tenhle člověk ve svých textech, které věnoval dnu médií, propagoval internet velice obrovský. Nádherné texty má, které se nám tady dnes nedostanou, ale pokud chcete, tak si některé z nich můžete přečíst. Jsou stažitelné na Vatikán 2. Tak. A máme Františka. A Františkovi se říká selfie papež, protože je to první papež, který si fotil a velmi rád dodnes fotí selfie s lidma. Tahle jmenovitě prý údajně je jedna z prvních selfie, samozřejmě je to první selfie, která se podařila zaznamenat profesionálnímu fotografovi, že? Takže proto se propaguje jako první selfie. Tak a teď se chviličku vrátíme, ještě mám 10 minut, takže těch posledních 10 minut se konečně dostáváme k výzkumu. A výzkum jsem dělala tak, že jsem použila metodu Digital Humanity, to je metoda, která vznikla na materiálu ze 13. století, proto tady vidíte, možná někdo ho poznáte, Tomáše Akvinského. Tomáš Akvinský byl, jak to říct, hyperaktivní určitě, protože napsal nějakých 30 opravdu hodně tlustých knih a psal je údajně tak, že měl 3 písaře, kterým simultánně diktoval každému jiný text. Protože tehdy se psalo ručně a pomalu, tak on 3 lidem simultánně každému diktoval, aby se to pohlo jinou kapitolu knihy. Těch 30 knih v nějakém roce 1940 něco začal zkoumat jezuita Roberto Busa, jsem si musela vzít tahák, protože si nezapamatuju jeho jméno. A ten zjistil, že by potřeboval nějakou metodu, jak těch 30 knih zanalyzovat textově, tak se seznámil se zakladatelem IBM Thomasem Watsonem a ten s ním začal dělat analýzu textu počítačem. Od té doby se to dostalo kousíček dál, jim to těch 30 knih tehdy trvalo několik let, než zanalyzovali, ale zjistili vlastně, jaké Tomáš Akvinský používal slova, v jakých vazbách, jak se měnila v průběhu toho, jak ty knihy psal a vytěžili z toho vlastně hrozně zajímavá data. Pěkné je, že vlastně začátek téhle metody začíná na teologických textech a vymyslel to jezuita. Tak to souvisí trošku tady s naší teologickou fakultou. A já jsem teda tuhle metodu použila jsem na to software, který je dneska vychytaný a můžete si v něm udělat hrozně moc pěkných věcí. A zanalyzovala jsem texty, které právě tihle 3 pánové starší napsali ke dní médiím. Vy víte, že existuje Mezinárodní den komunikace, World Communication Day. V češtině se to překládá Světový den... Ne, právě že ne. Teď si nespomenu, ale překládá se to blbě. Kdybychom to měli překládat, tak bychom překládali Světový den komunikace a u nás se to překládá mass media, něco je tam takového jako trošku zavádějícího v té češtině. Teď si nespomenu. A já jsem ty texty pročetla, dívala jsem se samozřejmě, jak se tam mění různé technologické názvy, jak se tam objevuje najednou internet a kyberprostor a digitální svět a spoustu takových věcí, které se tam různě objevují a miznou. Ale jedna věc mě zaujala už jenom při jednoduchém čtení, že se mění vztah papežů k těm, komu píšou. A podívala jsem se na imperativy, kdy se něco musí a nemusí. Protože ze začátku, když jsem četla Jana Pavla II. A Benedikta XVI., tak jsem měla pocit, jako člověk, který se nějak v médiích pohybuje, že pořád něco musím. Pořád musíme dávat pozor, musíme hlásat evangelium, musíme něco, prostě pořád něco muselo být. Tak jsem si říkala, pojďme to hodit do toho počítače a podívejme se, jak se tam to, v anglické texty teda, jak se tam to musíme, měli bychom, jak se to tam objevuje. A sami vidíte zajímavou věc, že poslední 4 roky v těch textech se ani jednou slovo muset neobjevilo. To je ta modrá, to jsou ty modré sloupečky. Najednou je pryč. Proč to tak je? Já už jsem na to přišla loni, tak jsem s napětím čekala, že vyjde letos ten další vzkaz, jestli tam to slovo bude. Nebylo. Uvidíme příští rok, v lednu to vždycky vychází, tak si ho přečtěte. Jestli tam nejdete slovo muset. Ale pozor, čtěte to v italštině nebo v angličtině. Modrá je muset, oranžová je mělo by se a šedá jsem pro jistotu dala heftu, i když to se nepoužívá v těch psaných textech tolik, ale pro jistotu, ať víme, jak to všechny tyhle prostě přinucující musíme, měli bychom, jsem z toho generovala a udělala. Jo, vidíte, že František nastupuje 2014 a tomu slovu se obecně vyhýbá. Ve 2 letech ho použil, ale víceméně po poslední 4 roky ne. Čím to může být? Nechám otázku viset ve vzduchu. Zkuste si na ní odpovědět. Prozatím necháme si to potom na diskuzi, jo? Nemusíme teď s mikrofonem, ale zkuste už nad tím uvažovat, proč to tak je. A pojďme dál. Když jsem to pročítala dál, tak jsem si uvědomila, že papežové začínají oslovovat někoho jiného. Jan Pavel II. Oslovoval stylem: řekněte jim, aby udělali něco. U Benedikta se stala obrovská změna. Najednou začal říkat my. Existuje tady skupina my. A to my bylo v několika významech. My můžeme být jako třeba my Benedikt XVI, to nepoužívá. My ale může být jako my církev a vy ostatní. To používal. My může být ve významu takové to máme nejčastěji teď kolem sebe a bude to ještě pořád častěji a častěji teď před volbama, takové to předvolebními. My to spolu dokážeme a uděláme, nikdo neví co, ale power. Jo, takže takové to politické my. Ještě může být nějaké další my? Může to být my ve vztahu já a ty. To je takové to intimní my. My jako společenství, které máme něco společného a které můžeme pracovat na tom, že jsme společná komunita. A toto my se objevuje postupně stále víc ve Františkových textech. Takže i to my, tak jak ho vidíte teď, vy tam vidíte zase, je to tam modrá linie, to je to my a zatím vidíte vzadu, že to oni, ta šedá, že to tam bylo a ustává to, ale ta modrá linie je najednou obrovský nárůst. My. A vy mi můžete říct, jo, na to byl dobrý poradce, který řekl, když se říká my, tak to je pro ty lidi lepší, když se cítí být součástí té komunity. Existuje výborná knížka, jmenuje se Skrytý život zájmen. A tam je napsal ji pan Pennebaker, kdybyste si to, je tam někde citovaná, kdybyste se na ní chtěli podívat. Tam je napsané, že třeba američtí poradci Kerrymu, který se nestal teda prezidentem, jestli si pamatujete na ty volby, bylo to asi někdy 2012, poradili, že málo používá my ve svých textech. Tak mu to tam narvali, vůbec mu to nepomohlo, spíš naopak. Jakmile se to my začne používat tehdy, když vlastně s ním neumíte pracovat, je to takové to politické umělé my, tak na to je ta komunita vlastně velmi citlivá. Kdyby byla politický poradce, tak na to rozhodně upozorním, že ne každý na to slyší, že je uměle zahrnovaný. Třeba taky v jiných kulturách, třeba Korejci nebo Japonci, když je začnete zahrnovat do nějaké umělé komunity, tak jsou na to úplně agresivní, vůbec to nechcou. No, u nás taková ta stádnost je u nás třeba jiná než u Japonců a Korejců, kteří k tomu mají odpor, aby je někdo do nějakého umělé skupiny my zahrnoval. Jo, takže se slovem my se musí umět určitě pracovat a tady vidíte zajímavou věc, že to slovo my se začíná objevovat s nástupem sociálních sítí. A zase dávám otázku, kterou vydržte a neodpovídejte hned. Ale moje otázka, může to mít nějakou souvislost? Může to slovo my, to posilování komunity, může něco znamenat ve vztahu k projevu médií ve společnosti? A další moje otázka, může to slovo my znamenat ještě něco úplně jiného, než jenom, že je to dobrý politický poradce, dobrý trik, posilování komunity, nazvazování komunitních vztahů. Může to znamenat ještě něco jiného. Jsem tady dala obrázek zcela záměrně. World Trade Center 11. září 2001, protože v té knížce od toho pana Pennebakera je zajímavý výzkum, který mě hodně zaujal ve vztahu k tomu mojemu výzkumu. On sebral obrovské množství textů ze sociálních médií, Facebook, Twitter, vzal vlastně blogovou komunikaci, bylo to miliony a miliony slov a pozoroval, jak se po 11. září 2001 mění koncentrace slov já a my. A vidíte to na tom grafu. To nahoře je já. Bezprostředně po 11. září. To já úplně prudce kleslo dolů. A ten druhý graf je my. Bezprostředně po 11. září to slovo obrovským způsobem narostlo nahoru. To jsou spontánní texty, to není žádný politický poradce, nikdo. To jsou tisíce textů obyčejných lidí, kteří najednou začali psát svoje myšlenky na internet. Není to nikým připravený korpus výzkumný, je to prostě sebrané z obrovské množství dat v Americe. Dělo se tohle. Zajímavé na tom je, že on teda si řekl, když je tam to já a my, tak pojďme se podívat, jak se mění koncept pozitivní a negativní nálady v těch textech. Ta plná čára je negativní nálada a ta přerušovaná je pozitivní nálada. Ta negativní nálada je, dejme tomu, čekatelná, ale ta pozitivní nálada, podívejte se na řádek, myslím 2,7, není to úplně vidět, kde vlastně dokonce po té krizi obrovské byla postupně to jsou měsíce, já se podívám, vlastně týdny, jo, není to dobře vidět, ale po nějakých 8 týdnech ta pozitivní nálada byla pozitivnější než před 11. zářím. To posilování té komunity, to spojení v my najednou v lidech probudilo určitou sounáležitost a chuť stavět něco pozitivního. On to dokazuje na mnoha dalších případech. Já jsem vybrala tento, protože ten možná ve vás rezonuje hodně, protože sice si ho asi nevzpomínáte, ale víte o něm určitě. On se dívá ještě dál do historie, že třeba i po různých třeba ránách válečných a to, že vlastně ve společnosti, pokud se ta společnost dovedla společně posílit a dostat do nějaké dobré komunitní atmosféry, tak ta pozitivní nálada se po krizi zvedla ještě víc než před tou krizi. Proč to tady celé říkám? Protože můj návrh je, že to posilování komunity my může mít za důvod tady tyhle dvě věci. Jednak, že prožívá církev, nejen církev, i společnost, jenom připomenu 2008, hospodářská krize. Po 2008, asi 2010 se opravdu do médií hodně dostal krizový problém církevní a to je sexuální zneužívání mládeže, o kterém se vlastně tehdy hodně psalo a v podstatě je domněnka, že i Benedikt XVI. Proto odstoupil, protože už neměl sílu řešit velmi těžké etické záležitosti, které se ho bezprostředně týkaly. Těch krizí tam bylo víc. Tak a už 5 minut přetahuju, ale toto jsou poslední 3 obrázky. Udělala jsem analýzu slov z těch textů, abych se podívala, jak tam teda ty slova se pohybují. To, co je uprostřed, tak je nejčastěji používané slovo a to, co se vzdaluje od toho dál, tak jsou méně a méně používaná slova. Toto je Jan Pavel II. Má uprostřed média. A můžete se podívat s těmi médií, family, jeho velké téma. Je tam to oni, je velkým. No. Média, oni, rodina, jejich, komunita, svět. Slovo. Teď se podívejte na Benedikta XVI. Média se mění v komunikaci. A najednou se tam dostává slovo vy, my, naše, až zůstává tam jejich. Média se posunuje na okraj toho hlavního středu. A teď nás čeká ten 3. slovní mrak, word cloud se tomu říká, to bude František. A než to tam dám, tak chci od vás tip, co bude uprostřed. Zopakuju, že teď byly média, komunikace a co bude u Františka? Rodina. Tak, Míša říká rodina. Další tipy, co bude uprostřed, to hlavní slovo, nejčastěji používané u Františka. Jakub vyhrává. Nejčastější slovo u Františka je my. No, ale zase se tam probojoval Bůh do toho centra. Ten tam nebyl. Naslouchání. Velmi silné téma Františkovo. A zajímavé je, že média a komunikace jako taková jsou pryč a místo toho je tam komunita. My, naslouchání, komunita. To je velká změna. Velká změna paradigmatu v tom, jak hovoří papež ke své komunitě. A tímto otevřeným koncem bych dala možnost pro další diskuzi. Zahrňme do toho klidně, i jestli někoho napadne, co vlastně se může spojovat mezi těmito 2 tématy. A kdyby měl někdo dotaz, samozřejmě ten výzkum je daleko složitější, já jsem vám vytáhla takové ty třešničky na dortu, protože je mi jasné, že tento týden 16. přednáška už nemůže být úplně moc ukecaná a dlouho trvat. Vydrželi, tleskám vám. Tak já jsem dala několik otázek. Krištof chtěl něco říct, ale už možná jsme mezi tím zapomněli, co to bylo.
Já si myslím, že to bylo něco s těmi zájmeny a proč právě to my a jakým způsobem to může mít jakoby dopad na tu společnost. Tak na to jsem chtěl odpovědět. A vlastně jste to potom i jako sama řekla, že to my je takový ten prvek, který umí stmelovat, že jo. A vzpomněl jsem si jenom ještě k tomu září, že vlastně možná podobný příklad by mohl být covid na tom začátku v Česku, jak se lidi semkli a začali šít roušky a najednou, ačkoliv to bylo tak negativní, tak vlastně bylo strašně hezké se koukat na ty zprávy a vidět vlastně jakoby tu empatii a to porozumění a to, že vlastně najednou Česko jakoby umí být jako jeden, stáhnout za ten jeden pro vás. Tak to byla nějaká moje asociace.
On ten pan Pennebaker navrhuje jedno řešení, že vlastně geneticky lidstvo je nachystané na krizové situace a geneticky, jakmile nastává krize, tak my máme tendenci se semknout, aby jsme přežili. Takže ta krize v podstatě působí proaktivně pro nás, pro komunitu. Jakmile není žádná krize, jakmile je hrozná nuda, tak se každý zavře do své bubliny. Jakmile se potřebujeme semknout, tak najednou jsme to my.
Tak, nechtěla jsem, ale musím. Ve chvíli, kdy Veronika položila otázku, co naše 2 přednášky může spojovat a propojovat, tak jsem chtěla říct nic. Obracím to. Přesně tohle. Uvědomujte si, že pod Prahově jsme to řekli. Spojení, intimita, přecházení do spojování, jo? Obnažení něčeho. Tak možná to je to, co nás spojuje. Krize, kterou prochází celý svět, společenská krize, ale i jiná krize, tak najednou otevírá otázky a vystupujeme někam ven, nebojíme se už. Jo? Spojujeme se. Tak tohle asi. To bychom mohli mít společného. My 2 teďka na té přednášce. To téma.
No já myslím, že nejen to. Já myslím, že velmi společné je to, že vlastně ta tendence tady v těchto listech papežských je tendence, o které ty si tady mluvila, že pokud to nezvnitřníme, ten proces medializace, tak zůstane vždycky jenom chladný. V Bibli se to píše. Není ani horký, ani chladný, vyplivnutě. Tak jestli nejsou další dotazy, dobrou chuť k obědu, mějte se.